Hey, hi, everybody. Welcome to the program. It is Tuesday, September 10th. And we are here live from the top of... hi, it's the Jeff Gerstmann Show. I'm your host for this week's installment of the program. My name is Jeff Gerstmann. And what a week it has been. It's nice to have new video games coming out a little more frequently in this time frame here. These past few weeks, I've been, kind of like playing a bunch of new stuff, and that's been nice. Let's see. Gosh, why don't we just? Hey, let me just. In the news, they finally made the PlayStation 5 Pro official. Mark Cerny appeared in a nine-ish minute video that Sony ran earlier today to discuss the technical prowess of this upgraded PlayStation 5. The probably the most important actual details about it is that it will cost $700 and it will be available on November 7th. 11/7. But that was not the actual the meat of the presentation. Were more about the technical, they didn't get Mark Cerny to get on camera to talk about prices for a PlayStation. They spent some time talking about what the PlayStation 5 Pro will do and what it might do for you. What will the PlayStation 5 Pro do, you're asking? That's a great question. It's all the stuff from the specs that leaked months ago. So all that stuff. It all came off of the PlayStation dev portal. It's all stuff that they were telling developers. So it was all completely accurate. I like the way that they are at framing the PlayStation 5 Pro. Most of Cerny's presentation was focused on the idea, which is an idea that I have been, it's the thing that I have been harping on about current consoles for a generation and a half, I suppose. And it is that idea of some of these games are launching with toggle switches that toggle between performance and fidelity. And I want a console that will do both. It's as simple as that. And I think that, the way that those consoles, the way these consoles have been now since the PlayStation 4 really, has been like, hey man, do you want a stable frame rate or do you want higher resolution graphics? It's a terrible trade-off because it ends up being somewhat bad at both. And so I think framing the pitch that way is a really smart way to do it. Because I think that those compromises are bad, and it's one of the core issues with consoles. However, that's kind of what the PlayStation 4, the Pro pitch was as well. And I don't think that really panned out. And I don't think that, when you give developers more power, they're never going to do that. Because that's not how they operate. They're going to go, okay, well, we're going to push as hard as we can on fidelity, and maybe this game runs fine at 30, and it's not going to be a situation like, Sony's not out there in their cert requirements saying your game will run at least 60 hertz, if not 120. They're not going to do that. And they shouldn't, honestly, because different developers will use the power in different ways and all of that. So a mandate like that, I think, is limiting to developer desires and creativity or whatever. But Cerny basically painted it as when he went out and talked to developers about what could our console be better at. That was what he cited, was we have to choose between fidelity or performance. What if we could have both? And yeah, what if we could have both? you know, and I'm sure when this thing launches in November, we will have both for the 50 or so games that will support it, and older games and what have you. But you know, you give it another 18 months or something like that, and developers will be right back to their same old, right? The switches will go right back in the games, and the fidelity mode will probably look better than it did before, and the performance mode probably might not look as compromised as it did before, but that's probably how this is going to end up, because that's how this always ends up. Anytime you do this, and so from that perspective, you just kind of look at it and go like, well, okay, what are we really getting here? And then it breaks down to the numbers. They're talking about the big three, which is great because I think it really opens up Microsoft to plow through and say there ain't no big three, it's just big me, and they're not gonna do that. It'd be funny. It'd be funny. Their big three. It's an improved GPU that they are boiling down to about 45% more, performance than the existing PlayStation 5. Ray tracing that is, they're saying double the ray tracing. And in some cases, 3 times the ray tracing in certain circumstances. Ray tracing, I think if you've, as someone who has had a 4090 for a long time and upgraded from a 3090 and all of that, I think ray tracing, it's neat. When it's there, it's neat. But it's never been vital. It's never felt vital. Sometimes you turn it off and you can't even notice. Because, it turns out developers have been lighting games really well for years and years and years. And they still do that. So ray tracing, I love the idea of ray tracing. When you explain it, when you show me sick-ass ray tracing, path-traced lighting demos, when you show me Minecraft and look at these lights, and you're like, holy smokes, that is some of the craziest stuff I've ever seen. But that is not translated into most modern games. And so I think ray tracing, again, it's a technology that will get there. It has to keep improving. And so they might as well keep improving it, because we'll get over that hill someday, and it will be performant and no one will talk about it ever again. It'll just be a thing. But right now, I don't know. It's really hit or miss when developers, are making really dark games and they path trace their lighting and do all that stuff. You're like, wow, this is really cool. But even in those cases, there have been spots where I've turned off the ray tracing and been like, oh, but also the developers that went through and did work to make sure this was lit, even if you don't have the hardware to do it, is also good. We're getting to a point now at the high end of hardware, the 4090 specifically, I suppose, is what we're talking about at this point. But that ray tracing has become a lot more performant, whereas, we go back 1 to 2 generations of NVIDIA hardware. It's more like a theory, like the frame rate trade-off for ray tracing was such a huge hit that you're like, oh, I could turn this on if I hate everything else about the way this game looks. Those days are starting to come to an end at certain resolutions, I would say. If you want 4K 120, maybe that's still going to be, hey, maybe they'll get it right next time. But ray tracing generally, it's neat, but it rarely feels vital to an experience. I cannot name a single video game where I'm like, man, with ray tracing, this game is worth playing, and without, it's not. I think there are situations like Control, when you turn on ray tracing in Control, and you get the better reflections on the glass and some of this other stuff. It looks noticeably better. You're like, wow, this is really cool. And the lighting in that game is really interesting to begin with. Cyberpunk has some really neat stuff in there. For their path trace lighting and all of that. When you go and look at it in the right circumstances, you're like, oh, I see what they're doing here. That's really technically impressive. It doesn't necessarily it's not a dramatic improvement minute to minute because you're driving cars and doing, you're not. But when you stop to pay attention to the lighting and go, huh, Cyberpunk impresses for sure. The third thing they're doing, they're calling PlayStation Spectral Super Resolution, or PSSR. PSSR. The makers of Xavier, Renegade, Angel, Wonder Chosen got in there and made some cool, anyway. PSSR is their equivalent of DLSS or FSR. It is that kind of machine learning based up-resing of graphics, where you render at a lower resolution, and then through the magic of PSSR, they up-res it to 4K, or I suppose 1080, depending on what you're doing. And the quality loss in that process is reduced through, whatever models they're training on, whether it's individual games or what have you. DLSS has been probably the actual game changer for performance over these past couple of generations of graphics cards. DLSS has been super impressive, and it has been getting better a lot. They're up to version 3.5 or whatever it is, and DLSS has been really fascinating technology. It is a great way for games to hit those higher resolutions in ways that the human eye can detect and go, wow, this is really great, but without having to push quite so many pixels to get there. PSSR will be Sony's equivalent technology for that. And, some PlayStation 5 games, I believe, have had FSR in there, which is, I believe, AMD's kind of software-driven equivalent. But the DLSS is a better technology, and so PSSR, I think, is erring on. My understanding is that it is a little bit closer to that kind of hardware style up-resing and machine learning and whatnot. So. So that I think is a big deal. That I think will matter, right? That will help those games to look better. These kind of machine learning driven algorithmic up-resing schemes have been really awesome, and have let you get away with a lot more impressive looking performance and visual quality on much lower end hardware. And so when you have something like a PlayStation 5 where they're not really doing much to the CPU in this upgrade, it is pretty much all GPU. This will help somewhat. The CPU stuff is, I don't know that I would say disappointing, but when you think about if you were a professional seeking a professional console, wouldn't you want it to be upgraded all the way across the board? Anyway, that's neither here nor there, I suppose. But it's it's a tough sell, I think. Well, I don't know. The reaction I have seen across the board from every corner of the internet I have checked between 8 o'clock this morning and 10 o'clock. I have not seen a single person been like, yeah, I gotta get it. I'm sure that there are pockets of players out there, and I think that there's a certain type of user for whom this is a really sensible upgrade. Because there are going to be people out there that will never consider a PC. They will never consider personal computing as an option for their gaming. Because I think if when you start chasing performance, when you start chasing visual performance and image quality and everything else, well, you could go that way and go a lot further beyond, depending on how much money you're willing to spend. But if you're willing to spend $700 on a somewhat better PlayStation 5, you could do some things with a PC for even somewhere around that money, not much more than that money, that you could do pretty well for yourself. But, you know, there are going to be people that are never going to do that. And there are going to be games that will not appear on the PC for whether it's ever or for some chunk of time. And you will have players that are, you know, in the ecosystem and they want to stay in that ecosystem, whether it's for, you know, sports games and they're playing their friends in those sports games and, you know, things that aren't necessarily cross-play just yet. Grand Theft Auto 6 comes to mind as something that will, you know, that'll be a game release that will get people to purchase new consoles. Whether that's an Xbox or a PlayStation, you know, like people will have their reasons for making their choice, right? But at the end of the day, you will have people who want to run Grand Theft Auto 6 as well as they possibly can. And for them, the PlayStation 5 Pro will almost certainly be that platform for the 12 to 18 months it takes for them to port it to PC. How dramatic the increase will be remains to be seen, right? I mean, that's something that, you know, like, I don't feel like they did a really good job in this 9-minute video of showcasing the difference. It's like they're showing, it's a YouTube video, first of all. And they're showing like PS5 and then PS5 Pro next to each other. They're not even taking up the full window of the YouTube video. They're showing it in a postage stamp in the center of the screen and trying to A/B test between them inside of this 1080p YouTube video. So, yeah, I don't know. If they put that video out at like full on, you know, a much higher bit rate and resolution or something like that, then I'm sure that you could start to do that. And I'm sure the people that want to do those breakdowns, I have to imagine Sony will make that video available at a higher quality for people who are intending to break it down one way or the other. Also worth noting is the $700 for this console does not get you a Blu-ray drive. This is a digital console. So if you want to run games off of discs, you will spend another $79 for the Blu-ray drive that you can bolt to it. Remember, they made that change back when they made the slightly slim as it, the upgraded, the redesigned PlayStation 5. At that point, they decided to just start making one console instead of two, and some of them come packed in with the drive bolted on, and some don't. In this case, it doesn't appear that they are going to sell a SKU of this that comes with the drive, which is a shame because when you look at the breakdown on the base model, it's like a $50 difference. So they're taking some of the price off of that drive when you buy it as a bundle. But here you will have to pay $79 for that add-on drive. It does come with a 2 terabyte hard drive in it. And so for that price, if we eliminate the drive from the conversation for a moment, the PlayStation 5 Pro out of the box will cost you $100 more than the 2 terabyte Xbox Series X that is about to come out in about a month's time. They're going to do that galaxy black, sparkly fleck, version of the Xbox Series X, and they're going to put a 2 terabyte drive in it, and they're going to ask $599 for that, which I think seems like too much money. And I think when you put it in comparison here now and say, well, if you throw another $100 at that, you get a significantly more powerful console. All the prices across the board for everything seems super weird right now, I guess I should say. And so a lot of these comparisons seem insane and whatever else. But yeah, 2 terabyte drive inside the unit. No Blu-ray drive. You have to add that yourself. Their Game Boost feature will continue to function and will be upgraded. That's something that you can turn on for PlayStation 4 games, and they will receive boosts that are not guaranteed to be compatible, basically, I think they're going to verify, what games work and what don't, but you can opt to say, hey, just boost everything. And that might lead to some incompatibilities, but you can do it if you want. So I assume Titanfall 2 is now going to run amazingly well. That was the PS4 Pro's test case for me, is like, well, how's Titanfall 2 look on this thing? So I don't know. They also made a point to say, because they always show it vertically, and so they always have to say vertical stand sold separately, which of course it is, but again, in a situation where you're paying so much money for this console above and beyond, there's no gimmies. There's no like, hey, we get it, and we're throwing this in, and hey, you're going to get this with this. Just, nope. Nah, son. You want a vertical stand? Yeah, we got one of those on aisle fucking 5. Have fun. They showed no new games during this presentation. They have said that around 50 games will be supported at launch, and they did spit out a list of games that will be PS5 Pro enhanced. They don't necessarily guarantee all of these at launch, but I would imagine that would be the case. Some of the games you can look forward to include blockbuster hits from PlayStation Studios and our third-party partners, such as, and there's one unreleased game on this list, unless I'm missing something, Alan Wake 2, Assassin's Creed Shadows, Demon's Souls, Dragon's Dogma 2, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, Gran Turismo 7, Hogwarts Legacy, Horizon Forbidden West, Marvel's Spider-Man 2, Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart, The Crew Motorfest, The First Descendant, The Last of Us Part 2 Remastered, and more. Yes, people in the chat are wondering if Conquered was supposed to be on that list. I would imagine so. For when it shipped, like, so, with what I remember the PlayStation 4 Pro launch, they started requiring developers to support the Pro months and months before it shipped. So if you were submitting your game to ship and it was shipping in the summertime before, well, maybe it didn't launch in the summer. Anyway, in the 3 or 4 months before the console launched, you kind of needed to already support the Pro device. Yeah, it's says, players can add an Ultra HD Blu-ray disc drive or swap out console covers when they become available. I assume that means that the existing, because they've been selling console covers for a while now, but this one, it like the drawing from your friend Bill Coon implied, it's a PlayStation 5 with plastic racing stripes grooved into it. I think it looks all right for what it is. I don't know. It looks like a PlayStation 5. I bought black plates for my PS5 at some point when they started selling those. My PlayStation 5 lives underneath this entertainment center behind glass, and I never see it. So I don't. Maybe didn't need to get that, but I did. But if you've got it on a vertical stand in a place of prominence in your living room, maybe you'll want it to be a different color. That's all for you. It will work with PlayStation 5 accessories. They do specifically mention PlayStation VR 2. So VR 2 games could theoretically target the new hardware for, improved fidelity as well. All those PlayStation VR 2 games that are coming out any day now. Any day now. You'll see. You'll all see. Job Simulator is going to run so dope. And like the original PlayStation 5, it comes with a copy of Astro's Playroom. Hell of a game. Pre-orders will begin the 26th of this month, and the console will launch on November 7th. They are going to sell it directly, but it will also be at retailers. Couple of things here. For a 9-minute video, it's not the right place to show a brand new game, but at the same time, I think they could have showed something newer. I think like saying, hey man, look at Horizon Forbidden West. You're like, yeah, cool. Who's like, are you going to go back and play that again? I feel like if you've had a PlayStation 5, you played that already. And if you don't have a PlayStation 5, then great. You should check these games out because they're good. Unless you played them on PC, because a lot of them came to PC. You going to go back and play Ratchet and Clank? I think it's a great game. I already kind of went back and played it when it came out on PC. So that's not that interesting. Last of Us 2 remastered, not that interesting. I think the thing they could have shown here that would have at least been like a, hey, check this shit out, that would have gotten people excited, is the obvious one. If they had said, hey man, okay, you win. Here's Bloodborne running at 60 frames per second. It's still a PS4 game. But boost mode makes it possible. But the way From always does that was always the thing when you're modding the game on PC, is that the physics are tied to the frame rate, and so like so many of those systems are interlocked in a way that like a generic boost mode probably is not going to do anything for you. I don't think the existing boost mode does anything meaningful for it on base PlayStation 5. And From Software has the bigger fish to fry, right? I mean, are they going to go and spend a bunch of time on a game that Sony owns half of, or are they going to move forward with things that are theirs and things that are, if anything happens with Bloodborne from here on out, it's going to be because From Software signed off on a Demon's Souls-like remake that some other studio does instead. It's not going to be nearly as simple as, yo, check this shit out. It runs better now. Unless you're going to hack a PlayStation 5, which I guess some people did. So yeah, sure. I think for a specific type of person, this is a relevant upgrade. These upgrades don't necessarily they don't sound like nothing, right? I mean, you don't look at it and go like, ugh, what is that, But none of them seem like dramatic game changers. I think also when you take into account the year that the PlayStation 5 kind of had, Astro Bot is definitely giving it an outsized, is shining right now, and that is making people very happy. But I think in a general sense, I think that a lot of the year the PlayStation 5 has not been great. And, when you hear stories about like, oh, the PlayStation 5 is kind of nearing its last blah, blah, blah. What are they going to put out for this device over the next handful of years? We kind of have, it's sort of a black box right now in terms of like Sony's future products. I think they've been fumbling around behind the scenes on some of these strategy changes where they wasted a bunch of time thinking that live service games were going to be their future, and then have moved away from that pretty dramatically from the sounds of things. And yeah. And they're still, the leading selling premium console for whatever that's worth. So they kind of don't have to do much more than they're doing. They're doing fine. And they're still probably trying to upgrade people from PS4s. So yeah, I don't know. It continues to be a very strange generation for console games. I think it's a really crazy situation. They've sold a lot of PlayStation 5s. They will sell, some number of Pros, but like the PS4 Pro was never the majority of PlayStation 4s in the marketplace. It was always meant as like an enthusiast device for the specific people that want that. And there are going to be people who want that, If you want the most powerful PlayStation available, then there is one of those for you. If price is not a factor for you, you will get a PlayStation 5 Pro, because why wouldn't you? But will they upgrade a ton of people from PS5s to PS5 Pros? Maybe not. Early adopters, right? the people that are just like, fuck it, I'm going to buy all this stuff because I love to own all this stuff and blah, blah, blah. Like, yeah. You know, those people definitely exist. I think like people are forgetting that, like, again, you're going to have people that care about performance, but they absolutely don't want to ever buy a PC. You know? And for those players, this thing will exist, and it will do. I'm sure it will operate in the range that Sony is probably expecting it to operate in, based on how the PS4 Pro sold and whatever else, right? So, this I guess this just feels like a weirder move than even the PS4 Pro did. I think because of the number of games that have shipped lately, and just like the overall software output on PS5, and how many of those games still came to PlayStation 4, and the lengthening of that generation at the expense of potential excitement in the new generation, and everything that's happened along there all kind of adds up to just like, what are we doing? What are we doing with this? You know? They also it'll support Wi-Fi 7. Just like the new iPhone, it will support Wi-Fi 7. As someone who owns a Wi-Fi 7 router but no Wi-Fi 7 devices, my time is coming. And I thank everyone for their way too expensive devices that will finally support Wi-Fi 7. They also say VRR and 8K gaming are also supported. Remember when they put the 8K logo on the box of the PS5 and then took it off? Well, it's back, baby. All those games you're going to run at 8K. I mean, hey, you know, maybe PSSR can make it possible. Oh, come on. Come on. I saw something talking about... I was trying to figure out what the upper limit for resolution and frame rate were on YouTube. Because there were some claims that there are 120 frames per second videos on YouTube. I could not find a single one. But there were claims that those did exist. But I also saw some of those. There's like videos on YouTube that claim that, and then also say like, and this is a 12K video for your 12K TV. Like, what? What are you talking about? Yeah, the same bells and whistles as the baseline PS5 variable refresh rate, HDR, and so on and so forth. But yeah. Enhanced image quality for PS4 games is also available to improve the resolution on select PS4 games. So that sounds like where they test it and where it is compatible, they will turn that on. And I figure like the boost mode stuff they've done to date, there's always a toggle where you can just say, fuck it, man, boost everything. I've never felt like that boost mode was doing anything dramatic. But also, I don't know that I'm not the what are the PS4 games? I still play a little bit of Virtua Fighter 5, which is technically a PlayStation 4 game. That's about it. I suppose, you know, some of these Capcom Fighting Collections are technically not PS5 games, right? So are you going to buy a PlayStation 5 Pro? If so, do you already have a PlayStation? Like those are the potentially interesting questions, right? Is like, if you don't own a PS5, would you buy a PS5 Pro? If you do own a PS5, like the chat is just filled with people just typing no over and over again. I see a couple of people in there saying yes, and that they already ordered the disk drive. So yeah, I mean, yeah, I wonder if there will be a run on those disk drives closer to launch, because they'll probably sell more of them than they have been. And you know, when GTA 6 comes out, we'll see what that does for these sorts of numbers. I suspect that'll be, you know, when the next batch of people move over from previous gen consoles up to the current generation, and we'll see if they make the expensive choice or not. When that finally ships. So we'll see. I am again, I think their pitch makes sense. I think their pitch makes sense when it comes to it is exactly the thing that has driven me crazy about this generation and the previous generation of consoles. So like him spending almost the entire time trying to address that, I look at it and go, yeah, you get it. Mark Cerny's a smart guy. He didn't get where he is by being, you know, like, hey, Mark Cerny knows what's up. He's like, hey, it sucks that we're doing this. It sucks that we've had to do this. So we're going to do a console where you don't have to do this. But you and I both know that's never quite how it works out. When you give the developers the power, they will do different things with it. So we'll see. What do you think the first PS5 Pro game will be that has a fidelity/performance toggle on it? We'll find out. Knack 3. Astro Bot came out. There's video of, if you want to watch some Astro Bot, I have some video up on the internet on youtube.com. If you are interested in seeing that. I like Astro Bot. I am not blasting my way through Astro Bot either. The same way, when Astro's Playroom came out, I could not put it down. With Astro Bot, I find myself putting it down after 1 or 2 levels. It's a very, like, you know, the levels seem a little bit bigger, and I like it. It is a very cool game. But it's kind of, I don't know. There's something about, I wish it was faster. And I've started to get into the levels that are more difficult. You start to find certain types of levels that are, you know, somewhat hidden in each one of the worlds that are not always the longest levels in the world, but they're much more challenging than the average level. But it's more of an exploration game. You know, there's little fits and starts of platforming with actual challenge to it in the normal levels. I'm on World 3 now, which is, you know, there's like a casino themed level where there's a few tricky jumps you got to make there, but not dramatically so, which is good. You know, it's not, you know, it's a game that I think anyone could finish if they put their mind to it, and then they put a bunch of extra bonus stuff in there, and that's kind of where the difficulty lies, which when Mario games do that, I'm usually not a fan. When it's like, hey man, breeze through this game, and then if you've collected enough fucking coins, we'll let you play the actual real levels. I hate that when they do that in Mario games. Here it seems more like, oh, if you go crash into this thing or do this, it'll open up some of the more secret levels, and it doesn't necessarily seem like it's fully governed by how many of the robots you have found. I talked about it in the video, but they have, much like Astro's Playroom, they have taken a very large nostalgia route with this game. Whereas Astro's Playroom was more of a riff on the PlayStation hardware and peripherals, and you were finding these really high-res models of, you know, the PlayStation webcams and all this other insane, you know, the iToy and the Vita, and finding all these really nice looking models of these devices. This one is more about the games. This one is a little bit more on the software side of things, and so you're finding themed Astrobots that look like characters from other games, which has been pretty hit and miss, I think, in some capacity. But also there's insanely deep pulls there. that are really cool to see. And also like ever so slightly depressing. It's hard to, like the Astro Bot is like, when you look at it, it is a big blinking sign that says, man, the PlayStation brand used to be wild and experimental and doing all this fun, weird stuff, and all these weird games were coming out all the time out of Japan, and look at this and so it's this big reminder of these games and franchises that used to exist but very much don't anymore, in some cases very recently, because some of these studios were more recently shut down. And so having like all of this stuff that like, oh, remember when Japan Studio made this awesome thing? You're like, that's great. Whatever happened to oh, right. Japan Studio got shut. Oh, right. Yeah. Oh, you've got a Wipeout reference here. That's great. I love Wipeout. Whatever happened to, oh, yeah, Liverpool got, yeah, okay. Right. It's frustrating. And so it's this weird experience of like, here's this delightful platformer that the whole family can enjoy, and it's very cute, and you're like, look at it. Oh, man, they got a robot what's dressed up like Parappa. I love that. And then you sit there and look at it for a little while longer and go, I love that. It's like that aspect of the game, I think, is a real bummer. And I also think that them shipping that, again, not that long past some of the layoffs where some of these studios kind of got shut down. And also, it's not necessarily related to it, but like having this happen on, at the same time when Conquered is coming out and completely bombing to the point where they yank it off shelves. It's this weird, that's a very weird and dramatic moment for video games, I think. To have all of that happening at the same time it's very weird. And it's very weird to have Sony, because this is their 30th anniversary. They're coming up on, December 94 will be the 30th anniversary of the launch of the PlayStation in Japan. And so they're starting their 30th anniversary celebrations, and they're like, the PlayStation, what a great thing. And you're like, yeah, it's cool, man. You've thrown away the first 20 years of it. The first 20, 15 years, whatever it is. But yeah, the PlayStation is really cool. It's unfortunate. But I think that's, you can't necessarily lay that at the feet of the developers. I think that they have made an awesome game, and it's clear that they have a passion for those franchises. So the other thing the game does is kind of like once per world, they have a level that that is more directly inspired by a specific game. In the first area, it's an Ape Escape themed level, which was personally very frustrating for me as someone who would really like a new Ape Escape game. And but also at the same time, it plays just enough like an Ape Escape game that you're like, holy shit, man! I can't believe they did this and pulled it off. And all, like it's a big push pull on a lot of that stuff. And I think that stuff works incredibly well. And it's a very big love letter to a lot of those franchises. I just think that a lot of that stuff lands a little in a bittersweet manner, specifically because like it doesn't, unless Asobi does it, unless this has been their game plan all along, is like, hey, we're gonna backdoor our way into making a new Ape Escape game or something. Then yeah, it's a little bittersweet. It's a little frustrating. It's a little sad in some ways because it leaves you thinking about, hey, I have had decades of amazing times with games on PlayStations. And a lot of those franchises are represented, and some of them are very deep cuts, and you look at it and you're like, wow, you put Mr. Mosquito in this fucking game. Holy shit. You know, you find Spyro in there, which is fun for a few reasons. And then when you go and you look at, they've written a line of text. They never come out and say, hey, it's Spyro. They've written funny referential names for all the characters, and they've written a line of text that goes below that is a little more descriptive, or just is like another funny little joke. And for Spyro, I forget what they call him, but like the line below it is like, last seen in the Skylands. You're like, Jesus Christ, are we all right? We're making Skylanders references in 2024. Yeah, I guess we're never going to see any of those ever again, huh? That was a big moment there for a couple of years. Yeah, I don't know. Like that specific aspect of the game, I think, is not landing as intended, because it's awesome, or it's mixed, right? It's awesome to see, like, oh man, someone other than me remembers Devil Dice. And you made a little bonus level there that is a lot like, that looks like Devil Dice there for a second. And you're like, holy shit, guys, you really have gone the extra mile here to honor this thing, and that's awesome. And well, what if, I mean, but also, what if more games like this just got made also? And that's when it's more like, well, what about The Last of Us 2 remastered? And you're like, okay, yeah. That's a high quality video game as well. Sure. Okay. It's frustrating. And some of them, I just, some of the characters I didn't recognize because I just don't have like a ton of affinity for certain, like there's a bunch of God of War stuff in there, and you're rescuing a bunch of God of War themed bots, and it's just like, here's another fucking robot with a beard. It's like a level that's got like 6 fucking robots with beards, and you're like, I don't know which one this one is. All right, whatever. If I read this dialogue, I'm reading the line of text and going, yeah, I don't know. This one's a dwarf. Fuck, man, I don't remember jack shit about any of the other characters in those games. Someone does, and for them, I'm sure it's awesome. But for me, I'm just like, okay. Whatever, dude. The fucking guy, the guy from the motorcycle zombie game is in it. And I would not have known that it was him, except the line of text below whatever they call a motorcycle man, or whatever, says it uses the word freakers. And I'm like, oh, right, Freakers from that stupid piece of shit game that came out. All right, that's cool that you're referencing that. I guess the guy that like made that game was mad about it somehow. I can't believe that they're using my character in this cutesy game. It's like, yeah, okay, sure. All right, this like absolutely average video game that's like no one fucking remembers. Oh, I can't believe it. No one remembers zombie motorcycle guy from the game. Fucking give me a break, dude. Astro Bot's really awesome. I think I wish that the camera, I wish the right stick, I wish I could modify the sensitivity on the right stick and turn the camera a little faster. I wish Astro Bot moved a little more quickly. Because some of those levels just, you're kind of just getting from point A to point B, and he plods a little bit. Like it's and so I wish the pace of it was just ever so slightly faster. And that's it. I don't know. Those are the only things I would say about it. I think it's really cool. It's really well made. And like I said, I think some of those references hit a little harder than others, and hit in ways that are maybe a little bit unintended, just because of like, it'd be cool if more of those games still existed today. But what are you gonna do? Herman Holst showed up on a podcast, speaking of Astro Bot, to talk about, to basically say that Astro, the quote here, as quoted by, well, both Eurogamer and Video Games Chronicle, Astro is very, very important to PlayStation. Obviously, we had the pre-install with the PlayStation 5 that millions have embraced and loved, and I think that's becoming a little bit of a platform to launch this new game now. It's remarkable that a very small team is able to deliver a game that's so big. It's really become a great game in itself, and it's become a celebration of everything PlayStation at this point. And he's right. Yeah, that was him on the official PlayStation podcast. But I think probably the more interesting quote out of him here, especially in the wake of what happened with Concord and the kind of hand-wringing that everyone's been doing for a long time about live service games and what have you. He says here, it's massively important that PlayStation Studios develops games in various genres, and the family market is really important for us to focus on. It's interesting that Nico and Nico is the director of Nicholas Doucette, the director of Astro Bot, is who he's talking about here. At the beginning of the project, talked about platformers and how so many of the great ones come out of Japan, and I was kind of joking with him saying, let's see those games at the bar, and I'm so excited that they're delivering that now. So yeah, I think that, you know, the live service push that we made, that Sony went for there and announced not that long ago in the grand scheme of things, I don't think that is still their internal. You know, they talked about, hey, we're going to have 12 live service games in the pipeline. Obviously, that a bunch of those games have been, you know, or some number of those games have been canceled. But I don't think that that's necessarily their marching orders across the entire organization these days. I think that they kind of reined that in and said, oh, okay, actually, maybe we're not really equipped to do this across the board that way. So maybe we need to instead broaden our horizons. And I think this is a really good indication of that, where he says literally, the quote again, it's massively important that PlayStation Studios develops games in various genres, and the family market is really important for us to focus on. I think that's about as clear as you can say it without coming out and shitting all over a past strategy, which, you know, they're never going to really do. But WTF Oliver asks, do you think it's right to throw all the heat at Jim Ryan for the live service push? No. I think that that was organizationally something that a lot of different divisions probably signed on for and felt that they could do. And they felt that they had the studios to do it at the time. So I don't necessarily think that lies at Jim Ryan's feet, and I don't think it necessarily died with his departure. I feel like that's something that they had already moved away from prior to his leaving. But we're talking about a pretty tight turnaround on timelines, right? Because when they said this publicly, like not that long ago, but I think it almost feels like at the time they said it publicly, it had probably been something they had been grinding on for a while, and at some point, not long after that, said, "Oh, wait, we don't have what we thought we had." Whether that's with, you know, their view of Bungie and how capable Bungie is, and how valuable Bungie might be as being able to vet some of these other studios working on games in that vein, or whether that's the desire or desirability on the part of the public to make a multiplayer Last of Us game, and you know, at the expense of other games that studio could be making, and you know, at a time when they're shrinking in some areas and shutting down some studios and this and that. Normally you would say, hey, yeah, we're going to make a multiplayer Last of Us game. And like, yeah, Naughty Dog's definitely going to be a big part of it. And we'll have some people there that is their main focus. But this other studio is doing the heavy lifting on it. You know, like, hey, we're going to make a multiplayer God of War game. It's like, okay, that's not going to happen at Santa Monica. That's going to happen over here. And this studio is going to focus on it. And some Santa Monica people will make sure that it is adhering to the brand book and make sure it's on the right track and doesn't clash with anything they're thinking for the future or things that they have done already. But you don't have that team pivot from making a very big single player game to, okay, now make and support a live service game. Now do this for the next 5 to 10 years. Like, no, that's not their expertise. You don't want them doing that. You want them in the trenches working on whether it's the next big sequel to The Last of Us or the next big franchise from Naughty Dog, or, you know, or you want Santa Monica doing something like that. Like, you have other studios that are going to be places where multiplayer gaming can thrive and where, you know, the development is focused on that stuff. And it just felt like Sony didn't really do that with a lot of those games. Or at the very least, it didn't seem like they were intending to do that with that Last of Us multiplayer game. And I think that's a bad idea. That's a bad way to go. And it seems like they realized that as well when they canceled that game. They're like, oh yeah, what? Once they realized, or, you know, or it's not a realization process, because these people are not dumb. These people have made some of the biggest games in the world. They know more about game development than I will ever know. And so surely they know, like, hey, if we're going to make a big multiplayer game, you're going to need to let us hire like a whole other division of people to run that fucking thing, because we're not going to be the guys there writing patch notes and doing community this and that to make sure that, you know, like, that's not us. But, you know, Sony's, you know, again, that's also coming alongside, you know, Sony shuttering some studios. And of course, we look at the amount of money that something like a Spider-Man 2 costs, according to some of those leaked documents. And you know, what does Sony want to do? I think that, you know, across the board, it becomes a situation of like, hey, what are some ways we can rein in costs on these big single player games? And it's not to say that they would walk away from multiplayer games completely. No one would, right? I mean, again, you want to have a variety of games. And I think gaming is at its best when there's a variety out there. But I think you want to believe, I want to believe, that a lot of studios that thought that, like, oh, we're just going to make one of these games that people play for a decade and we're going to make money on it forever. And yeah, we're going to make one of those. The studio's kind of chasing the so-called forever game, whether it's Fortnite or Roblox or Minecraft. Roblox, probably not a good template to chase for a variety of reasons. I think that studios that have tried to do it and pulled back, or tried to do it and failed, or whatever, I think you see some of them starting to realize, like, oh yeah, the skill set involved in this is not the same as the skill set we are using to make our existing games. It's just not the same thing. Like, free to play is a very different thing, and we, you know, maybe we don't have the expertise to do that. Or we don't have the stomach to do it and fail 5 times before we hit upon a massive game, you know? And so you look at these high profile failures, you know, you go back to like the Avengers, but, you know, certainly Suicide Squad. I think if you look at Destiny 2 right now, which they just announced kind of what their plans are going forward, you know, they're going to have even more expansions per year, I suppose, is the path forward for them. But like, their player counts are not necessarily thriving. And so you have these big, well-funded studios taking their best swing at this stuff with massive IPs that seem like they can't fail, and they're tanking, they're failing. And so I'd like to think that that's giving everyone the pause that they finally need to go like, oh, dude, maybe we're not going to be the ones to crack this. Or rather, like, hey, you know, Sony in their position of like owning Bungie and everything, like, I guess we kind of technically cracked it by buying this studio, but their best days with this franchise might have been 6 years ago or whatever it was. And so they're going to have to figure out that variety, and they're going to have to settle for like saner investments that, you know, can deliver a return on those investments that are not necessarily going to be a decade of money for hats and fucking shoes. They're going to have to get out there and sell video games the way they used to. And so I think that some of those studios are learning that the hard way, or learning it by proxy by watching some of these other studios fail. And I think that we will start to see some of that taper off as everyone kind of smartens up and goes, okay, we need to have a balance here. We can't just take everything and throw it into this, like, into 5 live service games and hope that one of them hits, because if one of them hits, it'll pay for the other 4 failures and all of that stuff. I think that an IP factory or a former IP factory like Sony, they're not necessarily the same IP factory that they used to be. They're not cranking them out the way they used to, but no one is. I look at it and think, you know, there's probably a path here where you've got enough existing franchises and you have some success with a single player. And this could be a case for why maybe a Last of Us multiplayer game maybe would not have been the worst idea in the world. But I think as you start to see success in some of your other franchises that are single player, or even if they're multiplayer, but they're annual games, like Call of Duty is not in the same bucket as this stuff because they sell a new full-priced product every year. It's not play this game for 10 years. It's play this game for a year and then buy the next one and play that game for a year. And they'll sell you some hats and fucking shiny guns along the way. But that came from a very different place. It's the thing that, you know, when Call of Duty kind of gets lumped into the live service bucket, I think it's people forgetting how Call of Duty ended up where it is right now. Remember that Call of Duty used to sell maps. The thing you bought over the course of a year of Call of Duty was 4 specific map packs. And that was the thing they sold. They sold a season pass for the maps, and you bought the maps, and that was that. And then, you know, occasionally you'd be like, do you want to buy 5 more loadout slots? We'll sell that on the side. But it was generally, hey man, here's 3 more maps. And then 3 months later, here's 3 more maps. And then so on down the line. And Microsoft got the exclusive, so they would get the map packs early. And so that would benefit them, and people would want to gravitate towards Xbox because they would get the map packs first. And they kept that marketing arrangement going up until the launch of the Xbox One and PlayStation 4. And at that time, this is more of an aside, really, but the arrangement flipped, and Sony signed the agreement to be the co-marketing partner for Call of Duty. And at the time, someone in Xbox marketing, I believe, decided to get very snarky online when fans were grilling him about it and being like, oh, I can't believe you let that go to Sony. And he was like, well, they overpaid for it. And my understanding of talking to people on the PlayStation side was like, no, we know exactly what we paid for it, and we know what they used to pay for it, so we're pretty happy with this arrangement. Around that time, you know, okay, selling map packs is bad business. Selling map packs is bad for players because you had to cover so many different scenarios of, okay, what does this user own? When a user launches Call of Duty and says, I want to play the game, when he says time to play the game, you have to then go, okay, what does this guy own? Or what does he have downloaded, even? Like, okay, you have map pack 1, but you don't have map pack 2, 3, or 4. Or in some scenarios, you have map pack 3, but you don't have 1 or 2 or 4. And also, oh, you bought the season pass, and so you have 1, 2, 3, and 4. You have to match all those players together. And so the end result in some years of Call of Duty were situations where you would buy the map pack, but you never played on those maps because you would just go to the, hey, find me a game of Team Deathmatch, and it would always be base level maps from the shipping game. Because that was the fastest way to matchmake. It was like, oh, well, we know everyone owns these maps, so here you go. And they would do separate multiplayer hoppers, and they still do this, but, you know, it's a different scenario now, but they would do things like, here's the Season 3. If you want to just play on the Season 3 maps, you can go here, and you would go there, and sometimes it would take forever. because all of those players were back doing, they were just hitting the main button and they were playing in the main thing with all the players. And so you never got to use those maps the way you wanted to. You never got to play those maps as frequently as you thought you should. They never got the same, they were never put on the same level as the baseline maps. And so you'd have these awful situations where like you would be friends with someone who had the maps and you didn't, and you would join a party, and then in some years of Call of Duty, that you might get match made into a game with maps that you don't have because the host of the party had them, and you get kicked out when you try to join, and it was a fucking mess. So at some point, they made the right move. They said, we are no longer going to charge for maps. Maps are now free. And so that instantly, overnight, solves that problem, because you can force people and say like, hey man, fucking download your maps. They're free. Get them. But then, because they're already used to having, and all this time they've been selling 3 tiers of the game, physical editions of just like, here's your base model, here's your slightly bigger box that comes with a steel case and all the maps, and then like, here's a fucking remote control car or some night vision goggles or whatever, and all the maps or whatever. They like that money. They're not gonna. Them saying the maps are free are not them saying, and the game is only $60 and there's no additional purchase. No, instead they said, oh, we're gonna start to sell cosmetics. We're gonna figure out skins. We're gonna figure out, okay, do you want a Captain Price hat that says "Who ate all the pussy"? We'll sell it to you. They should have. That'd be a moneymaker. But like it what got them into these optional purchases. And so it's not a live service game. They don't happen upon the live service stuff the way a lot of other developers did. I feel like they got this way very organically, of like, okay, the right thing for players and the right thing for our game is to not charge for maps, but we are going to charge for something. And so we're going to do these regular drops of like skins, or like, hey, you're gonna get some skins, you're gonna get some hats for your guns, hats for your guys, hats. The hat whale is here and ready to operate. And I don't have a problem with that, and then years later they added the free to play battle royale mode, which then once you've got a free to play part of it, then your cosmetics make even more sense to a certain degree. If anything, the free to play part of it, if you were to break that out on its own, almost that is maybe starting to resemble more of a traditional live service, but it's still kind of attached to whatever year's game it's coming out with, and so it is this weird hybrid in a lot of ways. But like Call of Duty got there, I think, in a sensible fashion, and I think you just don't buy the cosmetics, man. I get some of them because they're dumb, and I like that. But like, no one is forcing you to do that, and the game is better for it because you get all the maps. You get the stuff that actually matters. You get the fucking maps. That's all anyone ever wanted, was the maps. Karen Tan is in season 3. Like, okay, here you go. Get the maps. So I don't know. I think it's important to remember that, like, different games got here in different ways, because I think while people just started complaining about this stuff nonstop in such a variety of ways, like, it just gets applied as such a blanket term, like games as a service is ruining games. Like, no. Like, there's nothing wrong with the idea of, hey man, we put some more stuff in your game and it was free. Okay, cool. I'm not playing that game anymore, but that's cool that you did that. Or, hey, there's going to be a paid component to this and a free component to it, and the free players are getting something, and it's not as simple as that, right? So yeah, I don't know. I think the situation where you've got developers specifically chasing that money, that is where that stuff starts to get a little weird, right? Is you've got developers saying like, oh, we want some of that. And so even though that's not this studio's expertise, we're gonna make we're going to make a game like that. We're going to try to chase after them dollars. But obviously that's something that should factor early into your development and early into your design, right? You should know that you're making a free-to-play game early on so that you don't have to overhaul it at the 11th hour and go, oh, wait, the market shifted in the 5 years we've spent making this game, and now this isn't going to work anymore. We need to now go back in and overhaul and re-engineer this entire thing to try to make it work in this day and age and blah, blah, blah. That's how you end up with another level of fuckery stacked on top of an already precarious thing you're developing, right? So yeah, I don't know. It's there's a time and a place for that style of game, right? I think that the actual answer is like there's a time and a place for a game that you might play for 8 years straight, or might be your go-to game for a very long time. Like there's nothing wrong with that inherently. But it is very difficult to make one of those, and so it seems much easier to fail and much easier to see from a distance, like, yo, this ain't gonna work, man. They're gonna have to figure something out over there because no one is playing this game, or whatever it is. And all that stuff's hard. I don't know. I played a little bit of Test Drive Unlimited Solar Crown, which I think came out for everyone on Friday. It was one of those, or it might be this week even. I don't know off the top of my head. They did one of those like buy the expensive versions to play it ahead of everyone else sort of deals. This game feels like it was never going to ship. I feel like with the amount of times it got delayed and how long it was in development and everything with Test Drive Unlimited Solar Crown, it was just like, this is never going to happen. It happened. Sort of. It came out and their servers were initially terrible, and so you would get to the title screen and hit the button and it would just fail and you couldn't do anything. It worked about as well as Conquered does now. It's a title screen. It's a really nice title screen. And so if you signed up to spend the extra money to play this game early, in some cases you didn't get to. Very cool. Very, very cool. It's a driving game. It is an open world driving game. If you're not familiar with Test Drive Unlimited, Test Drive Unlimited was a pretty cool open world driving game back on the Xbox 360. And so it's interesting that the name is being brought back. It's not a good game. Let's just stop beating around the bush. Test Drive Unlimited Solar Crown seems kind of bad. They did a demo a while back that, like, just everything about it, you're like, this is, like, the performance is not great. You've made an open world driving game that is not entirely dissimilar to a Forza Horizon, but with, like, not just zero soul. Like, you're finding a way to actively suck more soul out of it as you play it. It's just like the most lifeless thing. It's a create a character game and you enter a festival, and and in this case the festival takes place on, or the Solar Crown competition takes place on Hong Kong Island, which is a real place. It's one of the islands of Hong Kong. It's not Kowloon. Pac Mantis asks, how's the soundtrack? It's terrible. The soundtrack feels royalty free. They do have a toggle in there to turn on like streamer mode to stop some music from playing. And so I assume there's some licensed tracks in there, but I put on the hip hop station. And it is the most, like, if you've ever gone to a royalty free music site and just said, show me the hip hop that has lyrics, it's the most like, yo, I'm getting down and we're fucking it up. They don't curse. That's I can't rap without cursing. But it's I'm keeping it real and doing my thing. It is the most generic, like smells a little bit like hip hop thing in the world when it comes to like royalty free hip hop. It's amazing. It's amazing. As far as I can tell, the entire hip hop radio station is just full of fucking that. Like, yo, we're putting it down and driving our cars. We're going to go real far and do that. You know, it's just like, fucking, really? Test Drive Unlimited Solar Crown feels like a royalty-free video game. Like, the assets are just like, are so generic. The created characters look so fucking middling, and just the world itself is so generically lifeless, but like vaguely futuristic. In one cutscene, you come in on like a 4-bladed quadcopter, and you're like, oh, like the future. It's the future here on Hong Kong Island. And the looks of the characters and the clothing that you can acquire and all of this stuff, like I said, it just, the whole thing has, it feels like a royalty-free video game. It feels like a game that would come in, and, you know, we're not there yet, but, you know, as these asset stores get bigger and bigger and bigger, this game has like it just has the vibe of something that feels like it could have come out of an asset store. Like, oh yeah, we bought all these licensed cars out of the cars are licensed, so it does have that. Like, I don't know, yeah, we bought all these generic face customization stuff, and there's a bunch of buildings we found in there. We bought buildings, and we just bought a city. We just bought a city on the asset store, and you drive around. I don't know. The handling doesn't feel great. The AI voice that tells you where to drive next, you know, like Forza, it has just a car voice. But it just it feels about as generic as you could get with a game like that, you know. It does the thing that all these games do. Because you have to cover you have to cover the 3 types of car, right? And it's why they do it. It's why they've always done it. It's not a surprise, but it was funny to see it in yet another game. I was like, all right, now you got to pick your car. This is going to be your first car when you start on your races. Which car are you going to pick? And it's like a fucking 2018 Mustang, a 370Z, and then there's always some kind of vague European or rally car or whatever it is. In this case, I can't remember the brand. Alpine? No, it was some weird brand. It wasn't even like an Audi or something, you know. But it was like, hey man, we put in the like American fucking new muscle car. And we put in the 370, like we put in the same Nissan that is the starter car in every other, like do you want a Mustang? Do you want a Nissan 370 or sometimes it's a 350? You want one of those? And then the third car is the one that kind of changes to, you know, some random. Yes, Alpine A110, right? And it's a French car. Okay. According to email in the chat. Yeah, it's not a great game. Maybe it'll be better when there are more players on the servers, but it's hard for me to imagine a world where that game sells well enough that you're seeing a ton of other players. I drove past one other human in my time playing it. And, yeah. You'd be better served just going back and playing more of the most recent Forza Horizon. Even if you've played hundreds of hours of that, there's probably still more for you to do in that game. Let's see what else. The Marvel vs. Capcom Fighting Collection that's not out, right? That's still a little ways off, I thought. But let me. Okay, that's out tomorrow. Okay, I've been playing that a little bit. It is exactly what you would expect it to be if you have seen any of Capcom's more recent kind of emulation collections. It's another one of those. It's got good options for choosing the US or Japanese versions of the game, which is kind of cool for Marvel Superheroes versus Street Fighter, which the Japanese version of that has a weird Japanese comedian in it. Is it Norimaro? They put him in there. They did not strip him out. They have stripped him out of other versions of the game as they have released it. over the years. It's awesome that he is represented here. I have not tried the netcode, but my understanding is that it is pretty much fine. Game's not quite out yet, so I searched for a match for a while and didn't find one. It's a good batch of games. If you like, I'm a Children of the Atom and Marvel superheroes guy. Marvel versus Street Fighter is an interesting game. Marvel versus Capcom and MVC2 are obviously, MVC2 is where that's where the juice is, obviously. But I've never been a very good player of any of these games, honestly. Like when Capcom went to the kind of like launcher air combo style that MVC2 has, really, really mastered. I was never very good at those. Yeah, there's a guy here doing some drilling. I got drillers on standby, son. Some more royalty-free hip-hop lyrics for you. Yeah, no, and I guess they did finally announce this stuff for Xbox. There are a few kind of like announcements related to Xbox that sounded like Phil Spencer picking up a phone and going, "What the fuck?" And it was this Capcom stuff coming to Xbox. They're putting it out on Xbox One, which is, fine. It'll run wherever. And then there was, I forget the name of the studio, but there was a studio out there that was just like, yeah, we're not going to bring our game to Xbox because we couldn't get them to return our calls. We tried, we ran into a problem. We were trying to get them on the phone to help figure something out, and they just wouldn't get back to us. Yeah, it's an Italian studio. And they put out a graphic on social media that says, "We want to thank Microsoft and for making it right and doing blah. We're working on blah blah blah." And which again sounds like, as that stuff becomes public and becomes a nuisance, as that becomes a hindrance to Xbox's public profile, that I assume that ascends up the chain again to if it's not Phil Spencer, it's probably heading in that direction of someone picking up the phone and going, "Fucking fix this. We can't have developers out of like ID at Xbox is one of the best things we do. That people love our, people appreciate developer relations. If we get a fucking reputation for being bad at DevRel, it's gonna not go well for fucking what the fuck, and so that's been fixed. So I figured that I figured that's exactly how that would go down, and it sure did go down exactly that way. And what else, man? A couple of other small things. What the Car is coming to PC real soon here. That debuted on Apple Arcade. It is the next game from the developers of What the Golf. And you play as a car that has legs that are sometimes short and sometimes long, and sometimes there's a bunch of legs, and sometimes you jump, and sometimes you have a rocket pack, and it's like a car that you move in a really weird way. And that is out now. That came out this week. It does this really fun thing, What the Car, where each level the car behaves slightly differently. Like I said, sometimes it'll just bounce on its own. Sometimes you're just running it on legs. Sometimes it's got 4 legs. Sometimes the legs are used to jump. But like it slaps together words at the beginning of a level to kind of let you know what you're in for. Where like level 1, one level will be like car with legs. And then the follow-up level might be car with legs, but big. And then it means it's got an even bigger leg. And so like these little sing-songy rule like portions of the levels where they kind of tell you the rules of what you're about to start controlling is really fun. It's got user created levels. I haven't messed with any of that stuff yet, but I really liked What the Golf and the other What the Bat, which is a VR game. What the Bat is really fun as well. I think that they just have a really great sense of humor and do really fun and unexpected things. And What the Car is another game in that lineage. So if you like any of those games, What the Car is another great one of those. And they've got some kind of post-release update, like they're going to be adding more levels to the game as time goes on, and all of that. I have played a little bit of it. It finally came out today after kind of a last-minute delay. I Am Your Beast came out. If I had to describe I Am Your Beast, it's like super hot with none of the slowdown. It's like if you had to play super hot in real time. And so it's a lot of like, okay, I found this object, I'm throwing it at this guy, that's making him drop his gun. The gun is popping up into the air and heading in my direction. I'm going to catch it and shoot this guy over here, and then I'm going to run over, slide, kick this guy, shoot this to blow a thing up, and do, you know, and you kind of make your way from point A to point B through a level, making sure you're killing everyone, or in some levels you're finding every laptop or whatever to get through the level. And this is all set against like some real like scenery chewing is the word I want to use, but like this really over the top voice acting in a very like, it's a really good use of like action movie tropes of like, you've got one more job, and then your guy is like, the fuck I do, and you know, like, and the back and forth there is really fun. I'm fucking terrible at it. I need to spend way more time with I Am Your Beast to feel like I have anything more to say other than, holy shit, it's fucked. It's like everything is happening so much in that game that I am getting fucked up over and over again in the first few levels of it. And so, I do want to spend, I do like the look and general feel of it quite a bit. But I am finding it very difficult in ways that I don't think are intended. And I'm just like, what the I'm just having a really rough time with it. Maybe if it had a super hot mode, really slow things down, then I could stop and think and, you know, but it is a very neat game. You should go check out some trailers for it, if nothing else, because I think it does have a really cool look to it. And that is out today. That is out today? That is out today. Let me double check here. Yes. That is out right now. It's neat. Gosh, let's see. So that's kind of it for the news and stuff. It is well, this week marks a really big anniversary here in the United States that I know I'll never forget. Obviously, you know, the launch of the Sega Dreamcast really touched us all. This is the 25th anniversary of the US launch of the Dreamcast. It is also the 29th anniversary of the PlayStation 1 launch in the United States. And I believe, is it 15 years since the release of Rock Band Beatles? That was also a September 9th thing. I've talked a lot about the early days of the Dreamcast. You know the story at this point. You know, you can go Google the video if you want to watch me on Good Morning America. You know, you'll never forget that video after you see it. And the fun thing about that video is that it was the spot where Ready to Rumble Boxing broke on live television. because I guess it was not just Ready to Rumble, but it was most of the entire first batch of games from Midway had an audio glitch in them. You can hear it in the Good Morning America piece. And they had to, I want to say it took like a month for them to get new copies of the game on shelves. But yeah, they shipped games with big weird audio stutters, and of course that happened on live television. And that was a big moment. Yes, the 10th anniversary of Destiny as well. They made it. Their 10-year plan. It went exactly as scheduled, exactly as they planned it. No deviance from the plan along the way. They didn't go, oh, wait, we should do this instead and find even greater success than they probably would have if they had just stuck to what they thought their 10-year plan was. I like Destiny. It's so many twists and turns and everything, but at the same time, yeah. It's interesting, the path that game has taken. The Dreamcast, though, for me, the launch of the Dreamcast in the United States was actually the end of like a 10-month journey. Because the console came out in Japan like the previous like November, or so it's like 10 months, somewhere around there. We of course imported one so that we could look at the games and cover it and whatever else. And so we sort of had a full year with the Dreamcast before it launched in the US. The launch games in Japan. I had to look this up yesterday because I was like, holy smokes. It was Virtua Fighter 3 Team Battle, VF3TB, Pen Triicelon, Godzilla Generations, and July, which is some sort of anime lady role-playing something. Ask me anything about July. I cannot remember. That version of VF3... Okay, first of all, VF3TB fucking sucks. VF3 is a bad fucking game. It is the worst Virtua Fighter by leaps and bounds. It is the Tekken 4 of Virtua Fighters. And so getting that in and going like, wow, this looks worse than the arcade version. That's not great. And Godzilla Generations, I couldn't tell you a thing about it now. I just remember I just remember it being a terrible game. I remember going like, man, what the fuck are we even looking at here? That launch in Japan was just like, well, I don't know, the Dreamcast looks cool and the box sure is orange, but like, not gonna go play this visual novel. Yeah, it was July, a visual novel. Anyway. And Pen Triicelon ended up being like the best game of the launch in a really crazy way. It's not a terrible. It's not a good game. It's got style, I guess I would say. But like that year, I'm trying to remember other games we imported along the way, because like Soul Calibur came out in August. So Soul Calibur was like about a month out from the US launch. And so by that point, I don't know that we imported a Japanese copy of Soul Calibur, because I'm pretty sure we already had a ton of US stuff at that point in time. Like the Sega had already gotten consoles out, and so we were already working on reviewing games. And so it was a dramatic... I remember it feeling like this dramatically different thing when the Dreamcast came out in the US, because all of a sudden there were all these games from Western developers. And some of those, the sports games, where that was like stuff that was coming in like super late for launch, like NFL 2K and stuff like that. But then you also had like that batch of games from Midway. You had Ready to Rumble, which Ready to Rumble, I think people look at it now and go like, what the fuck, Like it doesn't get the credit that it probably deserves because it was one of the more standout launch games in a really crazy way. The people loved Afro Thunder. But all of that stuff came in super late. And so you had this situation where, like, through the last almost a year, you looked at the Dreamcast and it was kind of hard to know what to make of it. You know, you kind of look at it and go like, well, I don't know. Like, you know, when we're just looking at polygons moving around on the screen, it's a lot smoother than a PlayStation. These frame rates are great. Like, there's a lot to like here, except for, like, I don't think any of these games are any good. And then we started getting in all the US stuff, and it was like a day and night situation of just like, okay, this feels like a launch of a comp. Like, okay, this feels like you're aiming for the North America. Like, it almost felt like that they didn't care about Japan, which was not the case. But like with the sports games and Midway's stuff and some of the other, you know, Western third parties that had lined up for US launch, as well as with, you know, Namco. Again, that game did come out in Japan like a month early, but our perspective on it was it showed up around then, but we were getting the US version of the game because we didn't need to import it because we already had US Dreamcasts at that point. And so it just, like, overnight, like a switch flipped and you were like, oh my God, Soul Calibur is one of the like, this is so much better than the arcade version. This is an amazing video game. Are you looking at, hey, you should come see this. Like, that alone was such a huge thing to happen, especially again after, you know, we go all the way back to VF3TB and you're like, okay, all right, we're in for it now. But that US launch was really kind of amazing. Compared to what had been happening for the past year, but also, you know, when you look at like NFL 2K and just like that franchise in general, it just seemed like such a big deal. So I don't know. I feel like that's a part of the Dreamcast story that doesn't really get talked about much is that, like, hey, remember, this thing had been out for a while in Japan. It wasn't like it launched worldwide on September 9th. Like, no one celebrates the Japanese date. But and when you look back at it, it seems like it's for good reason. You're like, oh yeah. Godzilla Generations, man. I'm gonna have to go back and play it. Because all I remember about Godzilla Generations is being like, God damn, this game sucks. This game is a nightmare. Why would anyone play this? I just remember being a miserable video game, but I couldn't tell you a damn thing about what it is and what you do. I assume you're Godzilla. I assume you do Godzilla things. Godzilla doing Godzilla things. But yeah, I remember Incoming, which was one of those games they used to sell graphics cards. It was like a turret-based game, so you were just like on the ground shooting at things coming at you in the sky, and that came to Dreamcast. And I was like, oh, okay, like this is a good showpiece in a lot of weird ways. Not as good as Soul Calibur. So we gave Soul Calibur a 10. I believe James Milkey reviewed Soul Calibur for us, and he gave it a 10. He was running previews at the time. Had he come in? I believe he had come in full time by then. I believe he was in there full time with us doing previews at that point, because he freelanced for us for a while before that. He like owned a bar in New York. He was like, I remember, he was running a bar and he was a DJ at that bar that he owned part of, I guess. That was the story I remember hearing. And then, yeah, he was, well, yes, people in chat know the James Milkey story where he was a Diesel Jeans model. And he played so much Space Channel 5 at his desk that all the PC guys who sat near him demanded that he stop. Demanded it. They're like, that guy is just sitting there playing that game all fucking day. Like, and the noise, it's making us crazy. They were so pissed. Anyway, Milky gave it a 10, and I remember at the time going like, because we did not give a ton of 10s. That would have been the third one, I guess. I gave the first two with Ocarina and I guess Tony Hawk 3 would have been out. No, Tony Hawk 3 would not have been out by then. So I guess that would have been the second one. But Milky has a new game out. It's on the Quest. It's a VR game. Star something. Star Wave. It's like a rhythm game in VR that I'm interested in trying. But yeah, the Dreamcast launch was a real whirlwind time. And I remember we were waiting for the final version of Sonic Adventure to come in, because they gave us there was a version of Sonic Adventure that they put out early because you could rent a Dreamcast from like Hollywood Video. I don't know if it was some or Blockbuster, like if they had an exclusive with a specific chain or if they just like put them out for rental early. But like you could rent a Dreamcast with like a couple of games. And there was a version of Sonic Adventure that was available there early on that was not the final version of the game. They made some changes to it in the and so there's a line of text on the cover. I forget exactly what it says, but there's like the cover is slightly different for those first versions of the game. And so like we had a review of that game pretty much done, but it was based on that rental version of Sonic Adventure. And we kept getting told like, oh, that's not the full version of the game. We're waiting on discs. We're trying to get this. And so we finally got the, we finally got the final version. Yeah, it said, I believe it was limited edition, maybe what those said, which is technically true. It was limited, all right. No, I don't remember noticing any massive differences between the two versions of the game. So we finally got the final version of the game, and we were able to finalize that review and get it ready to go. I don't remember what we gave Sonic Adventure. I just remember thinking that Sonic Adventure was fucking terrible. Because it's terrible. What an awful video game Sonic Adventure is. It's got that whale. That's it. That's it. That's a wrap, son. Look at that whale and go, man, I'm running away from that whale. And that happens in the first fucking 3 minutes. It doesn't get any better than that. Garbage. That is a game that, again, as much as it's as much as the right move is to say, well, people are going to like what they like. If you like Sonic Adventure, you were fucking 11. All right. It's a fucking terrible video game. Holy shit, it's bad. Just a fucking miserable goddamn fucking video game. One of the worst games of the launch, I would say. But yeah, I don't know, the Dreamcast, and then obviously, it's crazy to think about it, man. The Japanese launch of the Dreamcast was November 27th, 1998. The phone call from Peter Moore, where they announced that they were abandoning the Dreamcast, was January 31st, 2001. And so, if you think about the US launch, September 99, that's like 16 months. That's like not even a year and a half in the United States. It doesn't feel like it was that short. Like the Dreamcast felt like it had not a full run, but when you look back on the Dreamcast, it's a library that you don't look at and go, man, where's the rest of it? It felt like, it felt like more games shipped than than you would think, I guess. But and even, you know, when they announced in 2001 that they were not going to market the Dreamcast anymore, I think they still had some games left in the chamber to ship. Like, I don't know, Alien. When did Alien Front Online come out? I remember that being like, if not, that was not the last, but it was out there. Oh yeah, August 2001. But January in arcades. But yeah, okay. So August 7th, 2001 for Alien Front Online. Yeah. You know, what the Dreamcast did for online gaming, I don't think can be overstated. For console gaming online, they set the tone. A game like Phantasy Star Online, they did cross-platform with Quake 3, which lasted for about a week, and then Quake 3 PC released an update that was incompatible with the Dreamcast version of the game, and so that was over before it started. Unless you deliberately went out of your way to run an old Quake server, and then Dreamcast players could connect to it. The Dreamcast was inventive. You know, that was in some ways Sega's most creative era. When we talk about the way games are now, and you know, it's funny to talk. It's funny to kind of yearn for these days where a console came out and completely fucking failed. But like the creativity that was on display from Sega in particular through a lot of those games, is really it's really something special. It's really like it's an amazing run of games, and like solid arcade ports because of the, you know, the relative similarity of the Naomi hardware, and but like when you think about Crazy Taxi, PSO, I mean, you know, Rez, if we're thinking about late era stuff, even Shenmue, I will, you know, I am on the record as straight up shitting on Shenmue, and that will not change. But I will say, no one was making stuff quite like that then. Wasn't D2 a Dreamcast game? From your friend Kenji Ino? You know, Blue Stinger, the hits. The hits, man. Choo Choo Rocket. A game so you can play some Dreamcast games online. People have someone has put in place some private servers or some new servers that make that work. For whatever reason, I cannot get Choo Choo Rocket to work. You can't connect to. I can't get past the password screen. It just says like password error and disconnects me, and I'm so mad because I would love to play some Choo Choo Rocket online. Viking Death says you can't just say D2 without saying what the D stands for. Is it Diablo? No. The game is called D2. That's it. It's the sequel to D. God damn it. But yeah, it's it was a heck of a device. You know, the Xbox, the original Xbox kind of became the de facto place for some of those franchises to continue. Obviously, Sega would commit to the original Xbox in some ways, but they did go multi-platform with most of their stuff, and yeah, I don't know. Sega's doing fine now, I guess. It's just sort of a different thing. And also, I can't disagree with them doing what they did. You know, by the time we got to early 2001, you know, the writing was on the wall. The PlayStation 2 was the device that people wanted. You know, that had come out in Japan in the first quarter of 2000, and so after a year of the PlayStation 2 in Japan, it was pretty clear that the Dreamcast was not going to be the place where third-party developers were going to ply their trade, and you know, they were not going to necessarily support the console anymore. And you know, obviously Electronic Arts, you know, they did not put Madden on the Dreamcast, and that's certainly a factor as well. But also the Dreamcast just came out at a weird time. You know, it was a half step. The Dreamcast is a PlayStation 1 Pro, but actually supported with a bunch of new games. You know, it is a mid-generation device that was better than the PlayStation. Not really as good as the PlayStation 2. And so it lived in that little pocket there. But then that time that time ended, and there was no more room left for the Dreamcast in the market anymore. And I don't know, it's a bummer. But at the time, I don't know that at the time I was sad. At the time I felt the same way that I felt about this Concord announcement of them saying, hey, we're shutting down the Concord servers after 2 weeks. It was like, what the fuck is, like, when the call came, when the press conference was held and people dialed in to listen to Peter Moore say, hey, we're getting out the market. It was shocking. Even if you could understand it, even if you're just like, oh yeah, I mean, I get, like, sure, I guess it's not selling super well, and yeah, I guess all of these factors, it does make sense for that stuff to, yeah, sure. I see why they would pull the plug on it. I guess I see why that makes sense for them. Because they'll do better selling these games on PlayStation 2 and, you know, and then eventually GameCube and some of these other platforms. But it felt bad. It was shocking. I was sick at the time. I was home sick at the time. And so on top of all that, I was just like, oh God, what the hell's going on? Yeah. I don't know that I would say it was too early. I don't think you could say it was too late. I think it happened at the time that it could have happened from a power perspective and features perspective. And it did some really fascinating stuff there for a while. And it was online in ways that the other consoles were not. So obviously the PlayStation 2 would sort of get there. Some amazing fighting games came out there, kind of continuing the Saturn's legacy in a weird way of just like, hey, if you import games, you're going to get some really outstanding fighting games. But yeah, I don't know. Those are my thoughts on the Dreamcast, I guess, without just retelling the same 3 stories over and over again, because you know all that already. It's a great device, and it's nice that it's a lot easier, I think, for people to go back and look at some of those games, without necessarily having to own a Dreamcast to do so. That process has gotten quite good over the last few years here, and so going back and being able to revisit that catalog, I think, is interesting. I really, the last thing I want, I bought this game knowing that I would never put it into a Dreamcast because I would never be able to understand it. But I bought a copy of the, like, limited edition Sega Gaga when that was released. And Supposedly, someone is once again working on a translation of that game. There's been a lot of stop and start fan translations of that game that never got done, and I hope that someone gets it there. Of the games remaining that make me wish that I had learned Japanese at some point, that is pretty high on the list. But yeah, that's the Dreamcast. They should make another one of those. No, I don't know. It was always funny whenever it sounded like Sega had any kind of big announcement coming. There was always some faction of players out there that would, the same way that people are convinced that, you know, Bloodborne's getting a patch any day now, or, you know, or whatever it is. There's some portion of people out there that are convinced that Sega is going to make another console. Like, Sega's getting back into hardware. This is it. I remember the biggest time that I think that happened was what year was that? It was E3. Let's say maybe 2004. No. There was a press conference for The Matrix Online. And I believe, yeah, that would have had to have been E3 2004, if not even 2003, depending on when they announced it. And Sega was a publisher of The Matrix Online. Warner Interactive was not quite the thing they are now. Warner Brothers Games was not as big of an operation as it is today. And so Sega became a publisher of The Matrix Online. And so they held a press conference like, come see the latest. And I don't think they said what it was. They just said Sega is having a major press conference at E3. The Sega-ton. People were convinced that this was the Sega is back. They're going to make new hardware. They've got this is going to be them confirming their re-entry into the hardware market. And then you get there, and I was there for at least part of this. I don't think I stayed the whole time. And you know, you get there, and and here it is, and it's The Matrix Online, and you're like, oh. That's okay. Oh, that's cool, I guess. Like, everyone had worked themselves up so much into thinking it was going to be, you know, some massive other thing that yeah. Oh, that's what it was. Okay, I was trying to remember, because I remember the publishing on this being like fucked. And I'm looking at the Wikipedia page. Apparently, Ubisoft had originally signed on to co-publish the game, and so they were on the hook to publish it, and then they backed out. And then yeah, and then Warner sold their rights to the game to Sony Online Entertainment, so SOE controlled it there for a while, and then yeah, it did not last all that long. Launched 2005, shut down 2009. So, well, hey, longer than the Dreamcast, I suppose. Anyway, that's it for the news. There's you know, some analysts are starting to weigh in on some of this PS5 Pro stuff, which I think some of them were even saying last night once it became clear what this was, according to Video Games Chronicle. Ampere Analysis is forecasting 13 million units by 2029, which is, that's not that far off from the percentage of PS4 Pro to baseline PS4s, I suppose. But these analysts are saying like, hey, the price differential between the base model and the Pro model is wider this time than it was last time, and that may have an impact. There's a quote here from Piers Harding Rolls, who says, we expect the price point to soften demand with some consumers, but for PlayStation enthusiasts, the pricing is less of a consideration. Which, yeah, I should be an analyst. I could say shit like that. It's just common sense at this point. It's the math part that I'm like, gotta align these lifetime to date numbers and make sure they line up. And what are these numbers? Where does this line cross? That's where I would lose my goddamn mind. I'm scrolling back up because I was like, is that thing really $700? Yeah, no, everything is really $700. They're really gonna sell that thing for 700 bones with no disk drive. Man, could buy a fucking 3DO for that kind of money. Why don't we get into some emails? Podcast@gar.bike is the email address. So send in some emails and I'll take a look at them. Like some of these folks did. Let's see. Chuck writes in, ask about platform-focused podcasts. Says, I occasionally check in on an Xbox-focused podcast because I own one, but I've never identified as an Xbox gamer because I'm an adult. Every time I check in, inevitably it devolves into several grown men talking about how they wish Sony would literally disappear. Even when praising the latest Astro Bot game, they can't help but criticize other reviewers for praising it too much just because they're biased towards Sony. My question is, why the hell are there still adults who talk like this? They float conspiracy theories about people being in Sony's back pocket constantly, and it feels pretty damaging to the industry as a whole. Just don't listen to that shit. What? Why would you do that to yourself? Why would you expose yourself to that fucking stupid shit? There are other ways you could get Xbox related news without having to listen to, like, the idea. Oh my God. The idea of a platform specific podcast in this day and age is so fucking stupid. In an era when 90% of the games come out on 2 to 3 platforms, the idea of like, oh, we're only going to talk about the Xbox news. Now let's talk about Suicide Squad. You're like, okay, what? Like, that was a lesson everyone should have learned in the early 2000s. Everyone doing a platform specific thing is like 20 years late to growing the fuck up. So yeah, I just don't. I mean, yeah, they're gonna make that stuff, and honestly, I think why some people still make that stuff is because there are still like weird stunted people out there that are still about that life, right? I mean, Twitter is probably still full of fucking lunatics like that, and so these people cater to those people. Is it a grift? Maybe, I don't know. The money probably not that good. In just doing an Xbox podcast in this day and age, even just a PlayStation podcast would be the same thing. Like, it's pointless. So yeah, I don't know. Just don't do that. You don't need to do that. You could listen to you could listen to a regular video game podcast because most of those games come out on an Xbox. You know? Most of them come out on most of them come out on everything. And again, the differences between the platforms have never been thinner as they are right now. Even in the Xbox, PS2, GameCube era, that the differences felt very slim. And it's only gotten slimmer as time has gone on, you know? So stop doing that to yourself, Chuck. Believe in yourself. You're worth it. Aaron from Dallas writes in, like I said, I have not seen much positivity around the PlayStation 5 Pro announcement. But this was written before the announcement was made. Aaron writes in and says, is this all kind of stupid? Sony can't seem to keep studios open with the incredible cost of development, and as of tomorrow, it looks like Mark Cerny will be showing off the machine with higher development costs. Oh. Microsoft only makes 1 or 2 games that don't suffer a lot from input latency penalty, and they are doubling down on cloud. I guess my question is, isn't this kind of stupid? I know the mid-80s crash times are never happening again, but am I out of line for seeing a scenario where Sony and Microsoft hurt themselves right out of the industry? I just don't really know what to make of this. It seems, at least for my living memory, unprecedented. So I guess the thing I would say is, higher development costs on the PS5 Pro. I think that's probably minimal, right? Because you're doing the same work that you would be doing, similar work as you would be doing to support DLSS on a PC. And you're just kind of getting more power. How you use it is up to you, the developer. If you do minor things for your Pro build compared to your base PS5 build, I don't think Sony is necessarily dictating any specifics there. So it doesn't necessarily translate to higher development costs across the board. I look at it more as the what are we doing is really more about how long this generation has taken to transition and how many players are still playing on the previous platforms and how many developers are still putting their marquee titles out on previous platforms instead of just going to current ones and moving forward and cutting it off. That hasn't happened the same way it normally does. And, the reasons for that, we've gone over a billion times. It's COVID, it's game development being dragged down by COVID, it's the economy being in, kind of a weird place. It's on paper, it's better, but people aren't necessarily feeling that, especially when it comes to entertainment-based expenditures that, they might be a little more reluctant to spend when the cost of milk is as high as it is, all of that other stuff, with groceries being weirdly out of whack. The gas prices have been going down pretty steadily, and that's cool, but it's I don't know, it just feels fucking weird out there. But yeah, I don't know. There's a lot of weird little reasons economically that the current consoles have just been in a funk. The thing is I don't necessarily think that when we get to the next step, when it's hey, we've got a PlayStation 6 and here's a new Xbox that does whatever a new Xbox will do. It's hard for me to see a scenario where this changes. It's hard for me to will they make a more concerted effort to have a hard cutoff on the PS5 at that point? Or will that be when people upgrade to PS5s because we'll see PS5 and PS6 games for 3-5 years? Or are we getting to a point, I think Patrick Klepek was kind of speculating a little bit about this, or kind of, thinking through it, as I think we all are. That idea of hey, are we inching ever closer to that end of generations thing where we do move to something that is not quite the phone model because the industry will not tolerate and will not support annual upgrades, but will you instead see something that is a little more Like, okay, here's the update that's going to add this stuff, and it's a nominal increase in these capabilities. And, you know, hey, you should get this one if you want the newest, latest. And we're going to support 3 consoles at a time, and eventually one gets cut off from compatibility, and we all move forward. And, you know, the numbering, basically like the numbering scheme is different or something. I don't know. I think it's possible, but I don't know. I think if you keep juicing the most enthusiastic players out there, the people that are not price sensitive, the people that just got to have it, I think you'll turn them off. I think that those are the players that are probably the long-time console buyers. People that have been steadily invested in console gaming, specifically, you know, not looking to the PC and getting into that weirder upgrade cycle. But those people that have been like very much like, I play on an Xbox or a PlayStation and that's it. I think those are the people that'll get burned out, because I think those are some of the players that are going to feel the pain about live service games and some of the other stuff that's been happening too. And so, I think it's entirely possible that some of those folks shake loose of video games in general. If you do this too much, everyone's got their limit, right? Like everyone wants to say like, you know, and I think there's a lot of financial decisions being based on this idea of like, the people who love video games and they'll fucking eat it up. It doesn't matter what we do. It doesn't, like, they'll fucking buy. Like, I think that there is something of that mentality out there, but I do think that you're seeing more and more players at least say that they're getting fed up with it. Will it lead to them aging out of video games? Will they find something else to do? I don't think that's going to happen in a massive number that's going to like, oh, video game sales are in danger, you know. But I do think that the more that, you know, this stuff gets fucked around with and the more these players kind of get jerked around by like, oh yeah, you bought the wrong hardware, the new one's coming out in 18 months. And the more those players get exposed to that type of market, matched with games getting more expensive, and you see developers, you know, like not all of them, but you certainly see people out there saying, if anything, games are still too cheap. Like, okay, well, you're charging 70 for them, and we're seeing premium edition games coming for 100 or 120, and you know, like these insane numbers for a single game. Like, how many different ways are you going to push on people until they fucking snap? Right? Whether it's premium editions of games or microtransactions that are constantly being thrown in everyone's face. Like, the problem with all of it is that players are being forced to think about money more often. And the vagaries of that, and the like, all right, what's the way to get the best value out of, like, if I am going to buy this battle pass because there is one thing I want on it, what's the way to do that? What's the, you know, or if I do want this item and it's bundled in with this, like, do I have to wait now to do this? You're going to have more of those players become price conscious. You're going to have more of them feel burned by things that, you know, for a lot of reasons, technical reasons for sure. Like, oh, this game launched broken. Like, how, you know, people that bought Test Drive, and that's, you know, it's a weird case, but, you know, but Test Drive being a game that during its early access period, the servers were broken. What percentage of players there say, oh, I'm never doing that again? It's probably not that high, but it's certainly not the first time that exact thing has happened, and it won't be the last. And so if you're jostling these players out of the like comfort zone and out of the enjoyment of video games because they're being forced to think about technical issues or financial issues or microtransactions issues and all of that other stuff, I think eventually that bogs down players in a way that, you know, they maybe do think about playing fewer games. They just, you know, they don't think about it. It's just like, ugh, I'm not going to do that. Or hey, or even something as simple as this game went on sale really fast. It's September. Star Wars Outlaws is still full price. It's still $70. it's in need of a couple of patches. You know, I've had some crashes with it. I like that game a lot, and I think, you know, the review scores, there was a story going around that like the director of the game or whatever was kind of bummed that the Metacritics were sitting at like mid 70s. If that game ran better and was a little less clunky, and especially in some of its early areas, I think that game would have done noticeably better. From reviewers, you know, it's the thing that people forget. There were a lot of people complaining about Space Marine 2 reviews, while forgetting that on PC, Space Marine 2 was like kind of funky and has like, at least on my machines here, the two machines I have loaded Space Marine 2 on, has like insane load times where you're just staring at a black screen for literally like 3 to 5 fucking minutes, and it's on an SSD. You're like, what's happening? And then it loads a loading screen and sits there for a while longer. And you're like, what are we doing? Like, that's why that game's not reviewing well, is because it's got technical issues. Like, those are still a factor. Everyone likes to forget that, but the technical side of this is still a thing. And so, you know, when you have Star Wars Outlaws crashing all over the place, I like that game a lot. If we take the technical aspects out of that conversation, that game's an easy, and I'm not finished with it quite yet because I'm waiting for a patch. That game is some kind of 80, 82, 85. That to me is like one of the best games I have played this year. Like, oh, is this a top 10 game? Of course. Easy. But you start to layer on some of the technical issues, and they've been out there saying like, oh, we're going to make some modifications to some of the early stealth missions because people are having trouble with a fail state on some of those early stealth missions. I didn't run into a problem there, but I see why people would. But again, you know, when you layer on some of the technical issues and some of the other things that game ran into, that's why you're seeing mid-7s. Is because some people are experiencing way more of those technical issues, and they might be reviewing it somewhere down around a high 6. And you're having players that are not running into those issues, and they're probably giving it the mid 8 or something that I would probably give it. Ubisoft's stock price is down. Kind of, and there's like some activist investor or whatever that's like, you should take the company private because your games suck shit. Basically. And so everyone's attaching like the two games I keep saying come up in that conversation is that the sales of Star Wars Outlaws are not doing what they thought it would do, that it's off to a bit of a slow start. And I think about that and go like, man, like, again, it's a game with some technical issues that need to be cleaned up, but maybe we're already seeing some of the more diehard players being shaken loose, right? Because it shouldn't be... Okay. The Star Wars license, I think, still has plenty of juice in it. While some people will complain about Star Wars fatigue, and I do believe that is something of a real thing, I don't know that I agree that they've run that license into the ground. And so that's a thing that you used to look at and go like, well, that's a sure thing. You've made a licensed Star Wars game, and it's really good, and it's telling a cool new story in that fiction and in that universe, and it's really fun. I look at that and go like, yeah, that's okay, that's an easy one. Of course that's going to do well, but it's not. You're like, huh. Like, well, word of mouth on it has not been amazing. Largely, I think, because of some of those technical issues, and also like people are fucking creeps about Star Wars these days. And so there's a little bit of that going around too, but like I don't know that that's necessarily going to make a meaningful impact. Yeah, a few people in chat, Jasper said like, oh, hey, like also Ubisoft games are not on Steam for some period of time. That probably has an impact, but those games are on consoles as well, and it seems like that those games would would do well on console. So yeah, I don't know what to make of that. Like, is it a sign that the Star Wars license has been used up, that Disney has just done too much with it and people are just like a little exhausted of it? You know, is it a genre, or is it a license fatigue? Is it people saying, oh, it's a Ubisoft open world game and being pushed away by that? That's hard to say, because I feel like the fatigue about the Ubisoft open world game is something that like only people that are pretty inside joke about. I don't know that that's an actual like mainstream exhaustion or a mainstream consideration, right? But yeah, I don't know, man. I think that game does a lot of things really well, and it's super fun. So it's like I'm sort of bummed when I hear it's not doing well, because I'm like, oh, that's a bummer for the people that worked on that, because they seems like they did a pretty good job. I don't know. Like, yes, it has issues, and you know, hopefully those issues get fixed. But like, yeah, Jedi Survivor did well, and to the point where they're like, hey, we could squeeze way more out of this if we put it on PS4. So they're going to do that. Smart of them to do. And I'm on the outside of a lot of this stuff too, because like I don't give a shit about Star Wars, like as a license, as a franchise, as like whatever. Like, I am interested in good Star Wars games, as long as they are not leaning too heavily on like the movies or whatever. Like, you know, when they were like, hey man, we made a pod racing game and check it out, it's Naboo. Like, I don't give a fuck about Naboo. So like that whole era when they were like, here's Rogue Starfighter, like all the prequel games that were coming out all the time. Like, here's Star Wars Obi-Wan. Like, I don't give a shit. But like when they make a good Star Wars game, I'm generally like interested in seeing it. And this is a cool one that's not about Jedis, as far as I can tell, unless it's got a really horrific twist ending. But yeah, it's interesting to see this game kind of not like, I mean, it was never going to take the world by storm. I guess that's maybe a weird bar, but like to hear that it's like, you know, missing expectations or whatever, you're like, okay, well, were those expectations unrealistic, or what's going on there? Because it is a really, it's a really cool game. I think, you know, at this point you've waited long enough. I think I would wait, and if you're on the fence about that game, I would probably wait and see what the patches look like, and get to a point where, you know, if you've heard if they've cleaned it up well enough or not, and then probably, you know, especially if it's not doing super well, Black Friday's right around the corner, so you know that game's going to go on sale. So I would probably sit it out until then at this point. But I do think that people should absolutely check it out. I think it's a cool fucking game. Again, it's probably a game that lives somewhere on my top 10 list, which I've had to start thinking about a little bit now that it's September. But yeah, like, yes, NeuroKip, I think, says it best. 5 years ago, this would have sold like cakes. I agree. Like this, it's one of those slam dunk licenses, or at least it's been a very reliable license for decades and decades and decades. And so it is weird that there's kind of a weird feeling around it. Like, I don't know. That's strange. I would not have expected that. It's a very long-winded answer to Aaron's question about hardware and so on, but yeah. Jason from Scotland writes in with the subject line, hyenas and conquered. I know you're probably over talking about this, but do you think what's happened with Conquered vindicates the way Sega handled hyenas? I don't think the way Sega handled hyenas needed vindicating, I guess. Like, I played that game, and my thought on hyenas was, this is not going to make it. Hyenas was the competitive shooter that was like an extraction, like you were going into a space and extracting fucking Rubik's cubes and vinyl records and fucking Sonic the Hedgehog plushes or whatever the hell. And they ran a couple of betas, and then Sega pulled the plug on it. It was Creative Assembly was working on it, so it was like kind of out of pocket for the games that Creative Assembly usually works on. But it was like you're kind of on space stations stealing, and there's some zero G sections of the space stations, and you're stealing these ancient artifacts and seeing like arcade machines and other stuff around the levels. It was a weird. And then they tried to have this insane anti-capitalist like tone to it that just like felt so out of step with what the fuck that game was. It just had a real like hello fellow kids kind of thing going on in that department. Yeah. And so it was like this weird tone in a very like generic kind of game. Mitchell Arv is it Michiarv? Anyway, says that sounds cool if it wasn't live service slop. Oh, you mean like Concord? Because Concord was just $40 and they had no shop in it or anything, and they went out of their way to say, hey, we're not going to do a battle pass, and left some wiggle room there that, you know, maybe in a year or two's time, or, you know, something that maybe they would change it up a little bit, but that's how well that worked out for them. So no one can make up their minds collectively, I suppose. But yeah, I don't think anything about the way Sega handled Hyenas needed vindication. I do think that it's harsh, right? I mean, you know, that studio worked on that game for a very long time, got it up to a point where it was ready for beta, and then they put it out in beta, and then they were like, hey, nope, that's a wrap on this one. We're canceling it. And I think that that's probably the right move, because I don't think that game would have gone anywhere. They could have put it out and had it last for 6 months, and maybe it would have made a little bit of money back or whatever, but like they would have just been pulling the plug on it and then been like, oh, are we refunding people on the skins they bought, or how is this going? And then a bunch of people got laid off, and so it was just like this weird out of step decision for this team to do a thing that was not anywhere near their wheelhouse, which, you know, that's cool. If they're into it, but like the stories that came out afterwards didn't sound great. X Defiant was another game kind of brought up in the Ubisoft stock price stuff as like a game that is having trouble holding on to its players. They've started some promotion where every time you log into it once a day or something, they're going to give you some premium currency, I guess. X Defiant is doing about as well as I thought it would. So I don't, you know, I would not be surprised if it found its way to the Hyperscape graveyard even faster than Hyperscape did. Simply because, like, in a way, what Sony just did with Concord, like, really kind of clears the path for any studio that wants to pull the plug on a game to just go, yeah, fuck, dude, we're out too. Yeah, what's up with the finals these days? I know some people that love the finals. There's some people that has some that are very, very big on the finals, but I don't know how well that's doing. Not a game you hear a ton of people talking about. There's that game, what is it? Spectre Divide that just came out on PC. That is like a Counter-Strike style game, except you have two characters that you can swap between. And so you can throw out a thing that's like an Unreal Tournament translocator and then teleport your fake body to that location and then toggle between it. And it's a game that, like, when they first wrote to me about it, they were like, here's a list of streamers who have invested in the game. Like, oh, so you're desperate already. So like you're already trying to attach very desperate names to your game like as early as possible. And what's the Shroud is the guy's name. They listed him as like a gameplay advisor. And all I've seen on TikTok, I only see like famous streamers in TikTok clips. And so I've seen multiple videos of this Shroud dude like trying to play the game. Like it was a couple of them. There was one of him trying to play the game that he is an advisor on and not being able to matchmake into a game. I think that was during the beta, so maybe it was just like no one was playing or whatever. And then there was one of him going like, no, it was him like complaining about the game and then saying, no, they're working on it. They're working on it. And like, cause I guess his chat was like down his throat about this game that he, is like financially tied up in and is also streaming sometimes, while also streaming Deadlock and talking about how amazing it is. Which is funny, a bummer if you're at that studio working on that game to have like your plan of like, let's get a big time streamer on board. And then half the clips you see is someone talking is the guy talking about how much he likes another competitive shooter. But whatever. I don't know. I tried that game out. If I wanted to be playing a game like that, I would probably play Valorant. No, I mean, if I wanted to be playing a shooter like that, I would be playing Counter-Strike. And I'm not playing Counter-Strike. So the idea of like, here's a like kind of a worse Counter-Strike with this interesting idea. Like, I'm good. Not my thing. But yeah. It just just sometimes the questions come in and you're like, I don't know what planet this dude. Bo writes in, it says, Concord shutting down has me thinking about PlayStation multiplayer games. Do you think they'll ever make another Fat Princess, or is that ship sailed? You can still get into multiplayer matches with other humans on the original PS3 game. Bo, I don't like to say never about things, because I think if you stretch the timeline out long enough, someone's gonna try to bring everything back. But they are never going to make another Fat Princess. It's just not going to happen. That was a neat game. Fat Princess. I didn't play much of it. It was like, oh, this is kind of cool, but I simply do not think that will ever occur. So I would love to be wrong. Believe you me? Oh. But also I don't know that would necessarily like light the world on fire either. And be like a good move on their part. But thank you for writing in, Bo. I have not thought about Fat Princess in a long time, and more people should. Steve writes in from Royal Oak, Michigan, with a song he would like to never hear again. That came up last week. And he says, Drops of Jupiter by Train immediately came to mind. I fucking hate that shit. Yeah, dude, fuck that song. Yes, Steve, you are right. Fuck Train. And also, fuck Train. I'm sorry, Hype Train, I meant to say. Let's get the Hype Train going. Everybody make sure you follow on Twitch. We got to get this Hype Train going. Let's get this fuck train moving. Yes, no. Drops of Jupiter by Train is a fucking terrible song. Train sucks. Train absolutely sucks. A lot of people wrote in about Conquered. I don't know that there's, I don't know that I have, a lot to. I don't know that there's much more to say about it. But Chris wrote in and said, and says, estimating Conquered sales based on my own game's maximum concurrent users at launch. Says I kind of have a unique insight into maybe what the sales are for Conquered on Steam. When my game released on Steam, we had almost the exact peak concurrent users as Conquered. We had 725, which is actually slightly more than Conquered had. And for the first 2 weeks of sales, we had just over 15,000 copies sold. For my game, that was a pretty decent success since our dev team was just 2 people. Probably less than ideal for Conquered, though. My game was single player, though, so it might not be perfect to compare. In fact, I would expect their concurrent users to be higher given that fact, but just an extra interesting data point I thought I would throw in there. Thanks for your time. Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's like it becomes apples and oranges and all that stuff when you're comparing single player games to multiplayer games, and concurrent users never matter for a single player game because you can just play it whenever and it's a single player game. And eventually people stop playing it because they finish it. Where there's the idea, at least early on, for a multiplayer game is that it's the game they're primarily playing. And then Brian wrote in from Attica. Also about Conquered, basically like having the crisis, having the conflict that I think a lot of people had, where it was like, hey man, like this game is $40 and there's no bullshit. We're not selling any extra stuff. You can unlock everything else in game, and we're just selling this game. And then he's saying, well, if the game had been free to play, even if I'm tired of that business model, I would have given it a try. But since it went on sale for $40. I did not hesitate to let it pass by. Am I the problem here? No, I don't. At the end of the day, the player can never be the problem. Like they failed to reach you in a way that you would have accepted, whether that's the price or whatever. Like they failed to make their game compelling to people. That's the problem. And there are different ways to do that. The pricing model can make it compelling. The lack of monetization will make it compelling to some people, but not others, and all of that stuff. The thing that is actually really crazy, it's not really about Conquered, but it's been kind of a talking point that I've seen about Conquered before the plug got pulled on it, but also a few other games recently, is the insane sentiment of when talking about game reviews and coverage of games, has been people saying, make up your own mind, man. Play the game and have your own opinion. And we talked about it before, but like that is the dumbest fucking thing. Most of these games do not have demos. Most of these games are not free to play. It's something you can say that about a movie. I think you can say that about an album. Like, hey, the reviews on this album are really shitty, but you should give it a try for yourself and make up your own mind. Like, okay, I'll log into a streaming service and click a button and listen to it and pay no additional money for that. I can do that. That makes sense. A movie is like, well, how much is a movie ticket these days? $30? I don't know. No, it's like what, probably like 15, 20, depending on where you live. $7. You wait for a matinee and you see a movie for under $10 these days. I cannot remember the last time I went and saw a movie. And when they hit streaming services, you can get them, you can rent them for $20 or whatever it is on a lot of these different services and all of that. And so that price, I feel like, hey, $10, $20 for a movie that you're all interested in, even if it didn't review well, like maybe. But the idea of like, yeah, man, you got to make up your own mind. You've got to spend $70 on this and you've got to play it for 40 hours and then tell me what you think. Go fuck yourself, you idiot. That is the least helpful advice to give to a person ever. Ever! It's part of why reviews exist. Is because games are the last medium in a lot of cases where there is such a significant time investment that you can't play them all. You can't. Everybody needs help. Even me, man. Because I can't play every game that comes out. I have to pick and choose. And so I have to use a little bit of word of mouth here and there and be like, oh, this is something I was, interested in checking out. And it sounds like it's okay. Yeah, all right. And I'm in a position to actually play it for myself and make up my own mind. That's literally why I'm here. But yeah, it's stupid. It's stupid. I can't. I'm not going to spend another. I can't. I cannot. Pedro from Concord, Massachusetts, says Astro Bot might be the first $560 game. What if it was a $570? What if it was a $770 game? Okay. Astro Bot is making me feel stupid. I might actually buy a PS5 for this game alone. That can't be a good idea, right? I have a pretty decent PC along with a Steam Deck, and as such, don't really see the need for a new PlayStation. Everything donning the PlayStation Studios brand seems to be making its way to Steam after a set period of time, but I just can't see this being the case for Astro Bot. The game, by the looks of it, is so PlayStation-centric that even beyond the DualSense specific features like gyro and trigger haptics, it'd probably be blasphemy for Sony to put this thing out on PC. Astro Bot can't be flying around an old wired 360 pad, right? Probably not great optics for their brand identity or whatever. Yeah, I'm with you. I don't see Astro Bot making its way to PC. They could do it, but I think if you were gonna hold one back, especially in a case where they really want to try to make Astro Bot more of a mascot and more of a like I think if they want the Astro Bot franchise to continue, which Herman Holst on that podcast said that he is viewing it with an increasing level of importance, I think you hold it back. Because you could still just use the DualSense controller in the game. You don't have to swap the controller out for something else. And there are scenarios, like on a console level, on a system level, on an accessibility level even, all of the stuff, all of the weird controller shit, you can turn off. And so the gyro can be changed to be controlled by the left stick. Anything that would be tilting the controller before. I might actually switch to that anyway, because I don't like gyro controls in just about anything these days. The triggers are, it's using the triggers. Sometimes I wonder, I'm not going to go buy another DualSense controller because they're even more expensive now. But like, I have this blue one. Is it purple? I don't know. It's not within arm's reach. But at the end of these Astro Bot levels, you pull both triggers to make the ship take off, and the trigger vibration just goes clack, 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 clack. It doesn't feel like rockets. It feels like it's broken. And I don't know if it's just I've used that controller too much, and it's just like not working the way it should be, or what the deal is. But it was kind of funky. Buying a PlayStation for Astro Bot. I cannot necessarily. I like Astro Bot quite a bit, and you would get the previous Astro Bot game with that purchase, so you would technically get 2 Astro Bot games. That's a stiff purchase, man. You should go all the way and buy a PlayStation 5 Pro instead. And then buy Astro Bot and play it on a Pro. Because I bet the PlayStation looking spaceship, they will put the grooves in. If it's not already in the code somewhere, they will put out a patch that if you are playing it on a Pro, it will look like a Pro. I bet when they do DLC for that game, it will be Pro focused. It will be like, hey, here's additional modules for the PlayStation Pro or whatever, because we're going to try and sell you one of these things if you haven't bought one already. They've also said that they're going to add speedruns to the game, which was a key part of Astro's Playroom, and was super fun. But they're not in there currently, which is unfortunate. Let's see. Maybe we can take one or two more questions. I always assume that, look, we're going to cut questions off early and call it, but there's always so many that I can never get to them all. Taro writes in, we were talking about Unreal Tournament 3 on PlayStation 3 last week? Last week. Maybe the week before. No, I believe that was last week. Because you could make mods for that version of the game, and that was a weird thing. And I wasn't sure if they actually shipped with that, if it was just something they talked about, because that was the last game I reviewed before getting fired. I had a lot going on in late 2007. Did not keep current with the console versions of UT3. To answer your question about mods on PlayStation 3 UT3, yes, it was totally possible to cook a level for PS3 and deploy it without going through any vetting process. I did this for a level, and it was a horrific experience. You couldn't use certain features, or the cooker simply wouldn't work, but there was no documentation and no error logging, so you had to do trial and error. Certain effects would also drop the frame rate to 2 frames per second, and you had no access to the developer console, so you had no idea what was making your level run like garbage. It was basically a black box. After months, I finally got it working at 30 frames per second and felt like I had conquered Everest. Of course, nobody cared in the end because UT3 sucked. 15 years later, my full-time job is doing hardcore optimization for Unreal Engine games, so I guess it turned out all right. That's pretty awesome. That's pretty amazing. I'm only going to say one thing about this. Unreal Tournament 3 didn't suck. Was it a great console game? No. UT3 is still good. It's not the best Unreal Tournament game. It's a step down from the UT games that came before it. But it was still a fun game. It was still UT enough, man. I would take it right now, man. I'll reinstall UT3 right fucking now. There's no... Remember when they were going to make another Unreal Tournament? And then it was like a weird experiment that felt like kind of broken, and you're like, why are you doing this? And then Fortnite happened, and they just said, we're not going to do that. UT3, not a bad game. People get weirdly over the top in their reactions to that game. That game is totally okay. And as someone who doesn't really like a lot of the big weird vehicle modes and stuff that are the popular modes in some of the other Unreal tournaments, like UT3 is fine. I don't know. Chris writes in from Portland. Why do you think so many people treat independent games as some sort of magical thing that will save video games and not just a part of the industry with just as many vulnerabilities as the AAA industry? Why do I think that happens? I think it's because it's smaller teams, and so a lot of the people that make indie games are a little more forthcoming with talking about their struggles and talking about some of their stuff. But also I think you end up in a situation where, when you have like really prominent indie developers that are outspoken and make themselves available and make themselves out there, I think that the auteur thing starts to happen around some of these developers, because it's like, oh, this was made by this person, this was made by this, and and so you end up in a situation sort of like the Kojima situation, where where the person and their impact takes on an outsized presence in the game's marketing and whatever else. NeuroKip says it's easy to romanticize game dev, and I think for people who don't know anything about the process, it's even easier to romanticize doing it independently, because then it's like you're living your dream, man. It's like starting a band, It's like, we're going to get out there, we're going to write some tunes, we're going to get the van, we're going to just fucking go, we're going to live it. And I think indie development sometimes gets treated the same way as that kind of like small band thing. And then the small band gets bigger and bigger sometimes. And when they do take off, that they become an even bigger deal. So I think you kind of have to, I think as an indie developer, you kind of have to figure out like how to manage that, right? Because honestly, like up to a certain point, I'm sure that being out there and mixing it up probably helps raise awareness about your games. But past a certain point, it overshadows them in ways that, can have a downside, can have a very serious downside. And of course, then you're invested in social media in weird ways. It's the same, it's the same way indie artists in music have to be on TikTok these days, or even with their signed to record labels, or rather some record labels are going like, well, if you had more followers on Instagram, we're not signing anyone that doesn't have at least 100K on Instagram. And like insane things like that, where like you are ostensibly just trying to write music and put out good music, but you also have to become a fucking marketing wizard on social media, just like everyone else, and compete with everyone else for everyone else's attention to get word out about your thing. I mean, I am not in a position unlike that. But people don't really think of it that way, because you're just like, when you work on the internet, it's still the internet, right? But like a big part of like what I need to be good at, or I guess I would say need to be better at, is getting the word out about what I'm doing, both to people who are aware of who I am but haven't like discovered that I'm doing this yet. Because people are busy. I hear from people probably at least once a month that are just like, oh, I wondered what happened to you. Oh, that's so cool that you're still doing this. Oh man, that's so awesome. I signed up for your Patreon. I did this. I hear that like quite a bit. And it's funny because you think about it, like 2 years in, you're like, wow, there's people still, but like there were people that were like in 2010 or even 2015 that were like, oh man, I used to love you on GameSpot. What is this thing you're doing now? And you're like, dog, I've been doing this for almost another 10 years. Okay, no, hey, welcome. Come into the fold, man. Like people just, you assume that like you would have reached everyone who was already aware of you, but you don't, because they're living their lives, and they're not always keeping up with what every single person they've ever heard of on the internet is doing next. But then it's also like, how do you attract new people? How do you find new people to sign up for your thing and do it? And you're like, shit, dude, I don't know. I mean, I have some ideas, but at the end of the day, that's where you're competing against every single other thing on the internet. And it's hard. And so you're like, oh, okay, do I yes, do I need to make more YouTube shorts? Do I need to make Do I need to find more clip, like people, do I need to ask more people to use the Twitch clips feature to make clips of this podcast? Because then, and only then, would I be able to repurpose said clips for various spots on the internet? Maybe. I don't know. If people want to make clips, I say go for it. The number one thing, like people always ask, especially people who, they're like, oh, I can't afford to, I really wish I could sign up for the Patreon, but money's really tight. And of course it is. Look around us. Money's tight. I get it. I feel bad or whatever. Like, no, just tell people about it. Like, honestly, just like spread the word. It's the block and tackle simple stuff that if you're like, hey man, do you want to go, just go write a 5-star review of the podcast on a Spotify or iTunes or whatever. And, and tell your friends about it if it's something you think they would be into. It's really simple stuff like that. It really is this kind of word of mouth thing. There's no magic bullet. I used to think that there would be magic bullets. Specifically because I was working for companies that claimed to be big marketing companies. Like, oh, we really know how to market a thing. We really know how to market a show. Like, cool, man. I've got one of those. You should figure out how to get more people into it, because I'm doing a lot over here, but like I'm doing the organic stuff. I'm doing like the slow build stuff. If you want to like dump a bunch of humans on this thing, be my fucking guest. And turns out, no. Turns out that was not. It is not. That's not as easy as just like, well, we know how to market a show. We're a television network. We're a performance marketing organization, so we think we know a thing or two about getting things in front of people's eyeballs. Like, all right, cool, fucking awesome. You should do that, because then we can all make more money. Is that like we're all on the same team, right? Is that what we're supposed to be doing? No, you're never going to do anything for anyone. Okay, awesome. Oh, that's cool too. That's sweet too. So yeah, man, I don't know. It's just fucking weird. But that's the nature of it, right? It always has been. And it's how do you get the word out? How do you get the word out to more people? How do you find new pockets of people that might be interested in the thing you're doing? Also, part of it is recognizing I do a fucking really weird thing at the end of the day. That, might not be for everybody. Like the thing I do is a slow fucking build. The thing, like it is. I always viewed it as like, yeah, man, like this might build slow, but I think the people that get into it get way into it. That's what I've always wanted, is people who are here because they actually really genuinely like it. Like the idea of having like 10 times as many people might sound attractive or whatever, but like if they're super fickle and they're just like, they're the people that are like, we're here because we think it's cool when you play Fortnite and now you need to play Fortnite or we're all gonna leave. Like, that's the fucking hellscape. I would never want to be a part of that fucking nightmare, dude. Like some of these streamers get trapped. You see them out there, just the souls leaving their body as they're just like, all right, man, here, time to do another 8 hours straight of me playing fucking Minecraft and not cursing for kids. All right. I don't want to do that, man. And sure, yeah, no, totally, man. Like, yeah, I'm not even. That's nothing against Fortnite or whatever, or even people that stream a specific game. Like that's a hustle, and that's cool that they're able to do that. And if they like it, then good. But like the number of people I've seen that have been those like professional streamers that you just see like burning out and go like, I can't do this anymore. PewDiePie or whatever, like when he went from like, was he play Minecraft? I forget what the fuck he even played when he played video games. But like you see, even like Ninja or whatever, like going like, oh God, I don't want to do, like kind of working their way through that. I would never want to be trapped in that, man. I would never. I love doing this. Like that's like I understand how burnout happens. There have been times in my career where I've been like, man, like this shit is fucking piling up on me in a weird way that I did not expect. But like that's maybe happened twice over the 30 years where this has been just like a 6-month period where I'm just like, man, I'm really fucking feeling it. I really fucking like doing this. And by virtue of being able to, you know, not be beholden to a single game or whatever, I can change it up. And ultimately, like, you know, the weird part of it, and it's, you know, it's a weird part of it, but like I'm marketing myself as opposed to Fortnite. I don't have a creator code. I've got a Patreon. Is that better or worse? I who can say, right? But you know, like I'm doing my thing and I really fucking enjoy it. Like that's all I can really ask for. But yeah, also yes, there's if you and I don't know that I could do this even if the like ethical things weren't like a weird standout thing for me. There's no guarantee that I would ever reach that level, right? Like if I dedicated myself, like I'm gonna stream a single game and I'm gonna become that fucking dude. I'm gonna be the next ninja. Like, no, right? Probably not. So I don't know, it's a fucking weird. Yeah, it's just such a strange fucking market. So I don't know. Like I'm doing me, and if me is like a fucking as long as being that is a thing that helps me fucking feed my family and I enjoy what I'm doing and all this other, like this is all working out great. I can't fucking complain. This is fucking awesome. I want to do way more stuff. That's actually my complaint. Is like I'm trying to do way more stuff, and it's hard. Because there's just a lot of push and pull in my life right now. This morning I was awake from 12:30 a.m. to 3:30 a.m. with a baby who decided not to sleep. That's where I'm at. But yeah, I don't know, man. It's a weird. It's a very weird space. It's a very weird market, and you know, like I present myself as a different thing because I have this legacy as in genuine actual games journalism, right? So like that's how I view everything is still through that lens, even though I'm working alone. Like I still very much view it as a continuation of what I've always been doing. You could argue that that's a mistake. Like you could, you know, I think there's a case to be made that like, oh, if you pivoted this way or whatever, like then maybe that would be something different for you. But like, this is the way I know how to do it. So this is the way I do it. Right. So I don't know. It's an interesting business. And I like the video game business, even, you know, with all the kind of doom and gloom that's been happening this year. I still think that they're going to find a way to the other side. I think that there's snakes all over the place, and you see like shitty business, and you see people that have, you know, are running companies that are, there was a guy who was like the ex-head of, there was a gamesindustry.biz interview, I think it was. And he was the ex-head of Sony Europe. And his thing was like, well, layoffs, yeah, I don't know, they happen. Just, I don't know, just go to the beach for a year and then, you know, the industry will stabilize and then, you know, you can, you know, hopefully you'll just get right back on. I'm like, dude, fuck you. What the fuck? Go to the beach for a year. What the fuck? Yeah. Anyway. Yes, drive an Uber was his other advice. Like, come on, man. Come on. Anyway. That's going to do it for the show. So thanks everybody for listening. Tell your friends. Tell your friends that we're keeping it real over here on this corner of the internet. I don't know. You know, we're doing a thing. We're doing our thing. I have a computer coming soon that will solidify this dual streaming PC setup, I think, once and for all. And so we won't have to think about that anymore, hopefully. So that'll be knocked out, and then I can get back to thinking about visual refreshes of all of this stuff. Logos. I got asked for a logo yesterday, and it was like, preferably with an alpha channel and works good on a dark background and in a single color. And I'm like, I have exactly one piece of art, and it's the podcast image. And so I'm just going to upload that, because that's literally the only art asset I have. It should probably be more than that. Here's my 3000 by 3000 JPEG that I sent to iTunes. I hope it works. I made it in about 7 minutes. Anyway, I'm going to get going. Be back next week with more podcasts. Be back tomorrow, Wednesday, play some video games. I don't know, all this stuff came out, so I don't know what to do. If we'll do any of this newer stuff that just dropped this week, or what we'll check out. But I'll figure something out. And yeah, I'll see you then. Have a good one. Take care of yourselves. Yeah, maybe we'll play like launch PlayStation 1 games, because everyone did Dreamcast games already. We'll play Agile Warrior. Was that a launch game? It's close to. Anyway, I don't know. I'm taking off. I'll see you soon.